Good evening and welcome to the Gin and Tonic Show. Oh, Gin and Tonic Show. What am I saying? I'm so used to the Gin and Tonic Show. Welcome to Speakers Corner UK. And Stubbs just said something as we went live there. Check my audio.
I'm
It was
sorry.
sounding good. And then my brain went off to Gin and Tonic. So welcome to the Speakers Corner UK channel. We are back with another review, as we do whenever we get a chance. And this time we've got an interesting one with a atheist, I believe it is, called Pinecreek. He's a very mellow and relaxed gentleman, and he popped into the arena on Hamzas Den. So for those who haven't watched any of these sort of things, this arena is like where these gladiators, apparently these Muslim gladiators, will field any question from anybody coming in. Now, normally when you do that, you want to be able to field a question and be able to answer it thoroughly and so forth. And as we'll see, as is often the case, that's very rarely what they actually end up doing is answering the question, in any sort of complete way. There's often tactics involved. There's multiple of them. So when one doesn't know something, somebody else can jump in. They can Google things. This is all kind of set up to make them look good. But Stops, you were one of the people who enjoyed this as well. So without giving the game away, welcome, obviously, as my co-host, and give us a couple of sort of opening thoughts before we get into the video.
All right. I'm sorry for the beginning. It's just that last time I had a hum, and I didn't really know, and I still don't know where it comes from. So I wanted to make sure that I don't have it. That's what derailed Rob at the moment. So I apologize profusely for doing that. Well, yeah, welcome everybody. This is something that we both thought is quite interesting because, number one, it shows you arguments from the Muslim side, and it also shows you some tactics that you see as a response to somebody challenging them. Now, normally, they are very cagey about letting somebody speak. They themselves will ramble on and on and on, but as soon as the caller, preferably the non-theist calling in, as soon as the non-theist calls in and starts talking, they interrupt incessantly. Now, I've been on there, and I know what happened to me and how quickly I was kicked again. So it's like walking on eggshells unless you appease them. And I don't do that. And now today, I think we can demonstrate what happens if you take a different route, because Pinecreek is what I call serene. I mean, this is such a brilliant way of talking to these people. And this is why I said I would very much like to demonstrate this to others.
Excellent. Well, on that note, it's quite a long one. We'll see how far we get, how much we actually need to do here. And on that note, let's get started, shall we? So here we go. It's, as we say, this segment is actually on Pinecreek's channel itself. So go and give him a like and I'll share it here. Let me grab this and actually share the link and subscribe there to his channel. I'm posting it now into the chat, and you can watch it without, obviously, our commentary. We're going to do the commentary now, and if you want the original video, that'll be, I think, on Hamzas Den somewhere. So here we go.
It's going to be interesting. Apparently, there's ex-atheist something or other. Ex-atheist Christian, is that what it is? Sorry, you introduce yourself, mate. Sorry.
Yeah, hi.
I did a very bad job introducing you. I've never heard of you in my life.
I'm
acting like I know your life story.
I'm an ex-Christian, now atheist.
Oh, you're ex-Christian? Oh.
Yeah, by atheist I mean I don't say that there is no God. I just don't believe any of the religions of the world are true.
Okay, fair enough.
But I was listening in to your conversation, Murray, and it was like I was listening to myself. because a lot of the things I say and a lot of atheists say are very similar to what Muslims say. And I guess my question for you guys is, if you knew for sure I would never ever become a Muslim, would you rather me be an atheist or a Christian?
Wow, just break it here. Now, there's two things I want to mention here. Number one, first of all, he is not saying there's no gods or something. I also don't say that, but I don't mention it because for me it's automatic. Whereas, as we see, oh really? Oh shit! What a pity. Because I was hoping that he can join us. All right, then we'll have to talk. We'll have to watch this later. So there's different things happening here on different levels. There's no point in saying I know for sure that there are no gods. I mean, I can't do that because I haven't been anywhere and everywhere in the universe, and maybe outside the universe or whatever. So I can't say this. But I don't mention it because I think it's obvious. But what is nice here is that Pinecreek is saying, look, I don't say there are no gods. making sure that it's not only an insinuation, but that he's actually pointing it out. And the other thing that he's doing now is a really, really fantastic question, because he's saying, what would you rather that I am? And making them think about the consequence, making them think about the two options. And I think this is a brilliant tactic, making the people that you are calling into, to make them think about their position. And you can see from the facial expression of Kevin, of this Dawa film guy, Asadullah, that he's actually thinking. You can see the cogs starting to turn. I mean, Hamza immediately bowls out because he can't handle this. But this is such a brilliant question to start off with. So, man, Pinecreek, congratulations for taking this approach. I don't know how much the thing is, he's very experienced with Christians. Now, in my eyes, Christians are more advanced than Muslim apologists. And this is why maybe for him this is a walk in the park. I don't know. Yeah,
I think you're right. He's got a very serene, very calm way of speaking. Even the tonality of the voice is kind of inviting. And it's disarming, and it doesn't have their defenses up. Now, I obviously slightly disagree with him. Obviously, there's different views about atheism. I do say there are no gods. He's kind of more of a lacktheist. But that, as you say, then kind of opens the door to, I'm open to the possibility of a God being there. But his view is, I think, to people who don't know the difference between different forms of atheism, that's maybe more appealing to them, and they're not perhaps so defensive. So it's a nice opening start for him, and a very good question now, because prior to this particular segment, there was a Christian that they were going at quite hard, and so he's now coming on and agreeing with them that, hey, what he heard from this Christian was what he used to be, and so forth. So it's very much kind of, and I'm not saying he's doing it on purpose, but he's certainly ingratiating himself, at least being honest, but saying, hey, I used to be like that, and their defenses are down, and they go, oh, okay, here's somebody who kind of thinks like us, right? So it's a very smooth and soft opening, if you like. But then this question is an interesting one, because as Stop says, it does get them to think. So let's hear, because it's not a question that they probably are used to answering, right? It's slightly out of left field, but gives them an opportunity, hopefully, to engage their brain, and let's see what sort of response they come up with.
I'll be honest with you, you're both kind of mad.
You can only choose one.
A Christian could kind of get the idea of God and could move on to Islam. I don't know. I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
I treat you all the same.
Because
well, okay. So obviously, when he's asked to think on his feet, it's just like a babbling mess. He's got nothing, even remotely substantive to say there. And the fact that he says he treats you the same is obviously nonsense, because with a Christian, he doesn't have to go through, quote unquote, attempting to show that God exists. They already accept it, so he's going to challenge the Bible. So he does. Everybody deals with, different people's worldviews differently. So to say you treat them the same, I don't even know what that means. That seems to me to be devoid of any content there. But the fact that he jumped in so quickly as well, Stops, is a case of like, oftentimes his mouth wants to open up and words want to come out before the brain has engaged. But for the other guys are thinking a little bit about it, because it is an interesting kind of question. And, maybe a response would be, well, it depends on what sort of standard you might take. That's interesting. I don't know. Here's my thought based on this and this criteria, and so on. Right? But because he's out of the gate so fast, the brain hasn't engaged and the mouth is just saying some words. And again, as usual, nothing substantive there.
But it's amusing.
Yeah, I mean, but he's kind of almost like, I get it, like a sense of comic relief, right? He's there just to say a few words, but he's not in any way a thinker, and so that's possibly left to the others if they can actually do that.
Honest with you,
at least I'm not an idolater, right?
Yeah, you're all the same.
Clever.
You're all the same. As far as I'm concerned, you're all the same, mate. That as far because if you're a Christian, you reject Muhammad, you make God into something that I don't believe he is. But at the same time, you would have an affinity, the idea, the concepts of God, angels, and the supernatural and miracles. An atheist, you could well be a blank page that I could deal with, because atheism doesn't stand up to scrutiny. It's such a negative position. I don't know. Maybe science in the future will know. I don't know.
I mean, obviously, this is why nobody takes this guy seriously. His quote-unquote summary of atheism is so far out of left field. It's like either he's never spoken to any reasonably intelligent atheist, or it's such a straw man that it's almost not worth it. And we're not going to go into that now because that could take a whole show just educating him what atheism is and the tenets and so forth and so on, and that different people have different ideas. But I think it's more to highlight. I don't know if Asadullah's holding his head there in shame, or maybe he's just thinking, who knows. But that's sort of that, when somebody says things like that, even if I haven't, obviously I know him, but if I hadn't heard him before and I heard that sort of thing, immediately it tells me the level of interlocutor that I'm dealing with. And so then I know that, any sort of nuanced discussion is going to be very unlikely with somebody like that, even if I'd never met him before. Since we know him, we know that nuanced discussion is not possible with him anyway. And so really just kind of move on from that. Just, he's got a straw man of atheism. If you go into that, it's unlikely to get you anywhere. And if Pinecreek's got certain questions that he wants to ask, then getting derailed with Hamza's utter ignorance on what atheism isn't going to help him get to where he perhaps wants to go.
I don't know. And for me, here's how I'll epitomize it for you, Pinecreek. If you're a Christian, you put your mind in a box. If you're an atheist, you put your soul in a box. That's it. So you.
Well, since most atheists don't believe they've got souls, again, that tells you his utter ignorance about atheists, right? But sort of catchy phrases that maybe came up at the moment, or he's thought a lot about, but obviously don't reflect reality, which is oftentimes the problem, unfortunately, with Hamza at least. But an atheist putting their soul in a box, yeah, you've got to love that, right?
You're giving something up. I believe only Islam can unite the brain and the soul and give it peace.
God.
So I don't have to be religious and then not think intellectually. Or I don't have to think intellectually and then forget about spirituality and metaphysics and such. So I think only Islam can combine the two. So that's why I believe you're both, for me, I mean, the other boys might have a different opinion, but for me, you're both lacking something.
Yeah, I've had...
Well, obviously, we're both lacking something, but you don't treat them the same way. And I would say the same about Christians, right? You're both mistaken, but I would deal with them in some, at least in certain ways, differently, right? So, I mean,
absolutely, yeah.
Some Muslims comment on my channel, and they've said things like, atheists are halfway there. They say atheists are halfway there because they will say there is no God.
Yeah.
But leave that to, but Allah. I got a couple questions for you guys. What would you say is the main reason, like if you had like just 20 seconds, what's the main reason why you believe Islam is true?
Wow, okay.
Right.
Super. Yeah, okay, you go. I think we agree on this.
Please.
I think we agree. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I think that's a great question because it's short. And the one thing that he did there was say, if you had 20 seconds, because these guys will ramble on, right? Or if they've got a script, it might be short, but it's very unlikely, right? But I like the fact that he added, if you had 20 seconds. In other words, he's saying in a polite way, keep it short, right? And that part I like. And now let's see whether any of them can keep it short. If you guys are timing it there, we might stop it, so it might not work. But if you were to time it, could any of them give you why they think Islam is true in 20 seconds? But I thought that was a good question with the 20 seconds, added in there as a keep it short, but without saying it, which I like.
Okay, I can only add, I think it's actually perfect.
What's the first thing that pops in your head? I know it's a cumulative case probably for you guys,
exactly.
But what's the first thing that pops in your head?
It is logical, rational, and reasonable.
Okay.
Okay, next.
How about the other gentleman?
For me, I would say, if I was going to make it succinct after the event, I would say nothing fits 21st century man like a glove than Islam. Like I said to you, nothing deals with the spiritual and material aspects of mankind like Islam. So it's kind of like the perfect guide. I see everything that is detrimental within man prohibited in Islam, and everything that can benefit encouraged within Islam. So I believe it takes away the negatives of human beings. So it takes away sexism, racism, prejudice, all this kind of stuff.
I don't know what prejudice is, but this you could go to town on, right? His response there, I mean, typical Shabir doesn't actually commit to anything. So the non-committal Shabir shuffle, right? If you had to ask him for reasons and evidence, you wouldn't get much more than what he said there, just, in an expanded version. But with Hamza's thing, you could go to town on that. I mean, there's so much there, but I think what
claim after claim. Yeah.
But so much there that you can actually deal with. With Shabir's thing, it's just like, stand back and I'll just whistle a few things from a distance. At least Hamza stepped up a little bit and said all those things. Didn't take 20 seconds, of course, but at least there's quite a bit there that you could deal with if you were so inclined. I don't remember whether the other two guys will respond now, but let's see. Hopefully they also give a response.
Takes away the poisons in society like drugs, alcohol, gambling, sexual immorality. It encourages the family, the not cutting ties with kith and kin, the respect for the parents. The men are the protectors and providers for women. Take care. Paradise lies at your mother's feet. So many beautiful teachings. An example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and how he was and how he lived and how, for example, one guy wrote a book, Michael H. Hart, and he's put down as the most influential man who's ever.
Yeah, okay. So I spoke too soon there. He's off on a bit of a ramble now, right? Again, doesn't know how to give a clear and concise response, unfortunately.
Existed as Muhammad, peace and peace be upon him, and he's not even a Muslim, he's a Christian. And the reason why he said that he put Muhammad number one is that he was successful in every aspect of his life, whether he was a father, as a husband, as a military leader, as a diplomat, as a neighbor, as a friend, as a businessman. Whatever he was successful at.
Okay, the problem with saying somebody's successful, it depends on the goal. Hitler was successful at eliminating Jews. Does that make it, should he be somewhere influential in this book? To say that somebody's successful just because they met a particular goal isn't particularly helpful. You know, we've got to agree that the goal is something worthwhile, it's something that we might want to emulate, etc. And if we look at the life of Muhammad and we look at the Quran, then there's many things we certainly wouldn't want to emulate, and we wouldn't want anybody else to emulate. And sadly, there's at least some Muslims that try to emulate some or most of that. So whatever this book is, I think, you know, it's this arbitrary thing of, well, you know, the fact that he met his goals, quote unquote, if we accept that that's the case, is just an arbitrary standard. You could do that about, you know, anybody. It's whether the goals are something that we would look towards and, you know, want to aspire to.
Well, the other thing is that just below that is Stalin. And the other thing is, I think Hamza's missed it completely, because is he trying to tell us that he is a Muslim because Michael Hart put Muhammad as number one? That is the question. What is the first thing that pops into your head why you are a Muslim? Is that the first thing that pops into your head? So what if Michael Hart had put him at number two? Would you not be a Muslim? This is crazy what he's doing.
I think this is extra stuff, Stops, because he did sort of say stuff at the beginning, but unfortunately,
but he should have
instead
stopped.
of stopping there and let other people go in, because
Exactly.
20 seconds, right? He's now gone on a bit of a ramble. And so this is just extra information because people don't know how to be clear and concise, and because impactful stuff actually is what people remember. This sort of rambling part now is just trying to back up what, and oftentimes I think when people do this is because they don't feel like what they said initially is strong enough, so they now need to go and add extra bits in to try and shore up what they said at the beginning. Because if you're short and concise and powerful in the beginning, you don't need anything else. And so this is just a ramble now, and as you say, not particularly, nobody else would take that serious. The fact that some guy's opinion about Muhammad is X, that's not going to convince anybody else, except people who already believe it, because it confirms, and it's a likable thing, it's an agreeable thing for them, and so they're going to quote anything that's agreeable and just sidestep or ignore or try and refute anything that's disagreeable.
So in life, if you want to be successful, you look for the most successful people to be successful. So if you're into IT or
just
software,
stop there, Rob.
Bill Gates.
Are you able to go back like 5 seconds? Mm-hmm. Because this is going to be important later on, because he's going to say, I never said this.
Friend, as a businessman, whatever he was successful at. So in life, if you want to be successful, you look for the most successful people to be successful. So if you're into IT or software, whatever.
Just remember that for later, where he says, if you want to be successful, you look at the most successful people around you, or something like this. And later on, he said, I never said that.
All right, great. Let's remember that then. Good. Put a pin in that, so to speak. Underline it, I think, is a word that we often hear from Hamza himself. So let's put a big, bold underline under that then.
As you look at Bill Gates, look what he did, try to emulate him. You might look at Alan Sugar, look how he built and his built up to what he is. The beautiful thing about Islam, we have the perfect man to role model.
Okay, good. So that's what I said, right? When you say you want to emulate people, you look at people as role models, etc. It's the goals that they are aspiring to is what at least some people, if not the majority of people, would want to aspire to in their own way. And now you look at, quote unquote, the perfect example, and we can list all the things. We don't need to now do so, but there's certainly some very unpleasant things that Muhammad, quote unquote, aspired to that none of us would want to do. And in fact, if you did it in any Western country, at least today, you'd be behind bars or in a psychiatric institute or worse. So again, it's in relation to a particular goal. We could, Hitler was very good at, chasing down his goal of wiping out the Jews and, taking over Europe. That goal he met extremely well. If it weren't for him being a kind of a bad leader towards the end, that would have lasted perhaps longer. Who knows, right? So he accomplished that goal, as you said. It's Stalin number 2. Well, if his goal was authoritarianism, he set a gold standard for that sort of thing. So he was good in that sense, and that should tell you something, right? If you're saying that Stalin is one of those, and you read that book, then the immediate question to me is, well, how are you judging these people? But he said it was a perfect example, right?
Stalin is not number 2; it's just a couple down.
Oh, okay. So, but he's in the top sort of line of these. So my question reading that book is, what's the criteria this guy is using to rank these people? That's going to be an immediate question mark for me. But anyway, obviously it's not for him because Muhammad's number 1, as you pointed out. But the important thing he said now was that Muhammad is a perfect example. So let's see whether, because obviously Muhammad is just saying what God tells him to say. So let's see whether, this perfect example is in fact as perfect as he claims, and by what standard. Because anybody could say you're perfect, but perfect in relation to what? It's always in relation to a goal. It's not perfect in and of itself. I mean, that wouldn't be easy for you to argue. In other words, like a categorical imperative, something that's good in and of itself. That's very rare. I'm not convinced, although I'm not well read on it, I'm not convinced that there are any strong categorical imperatives. The one that's often used is something like, don't tell a lie. Well, that's only a good thing in relation to you telling the truth, and that's in some way good for you, right? So, but if you're a liar, then keep your promises. Keep your promises. Then if you're a liar, well, then that's not in relation to your goal, in which case it wouldn't be a good imperative to follow.
All model ourselves off how to be with our wives, our families, our neighbors, how to conduct ourselves within a society, in a social construct. I know it's not a few words, I know it's not 20 seconds, but
I like your answer because your answer appeals to me because it's where the rubber hits the road. It's very practical and pragmatic.
For me, and that's how I roll, me personally. It's the tangibility of it, and like my brother Shabir said, it's the rationality of it. And it goes back to my original point. I don't have to put my mind in a box to accept this thing. Christianity, there's no way can you allow your intellect out of that box, because you ain't going to buy it.
Just the irony of this, that Christianity doesn't allow your mind out of a box, says the Muslim who's in a box, who doesn't even realize he's in a box. That's the double irony, right? Saying the Christians are doing it when he's exactly in the same position, but also not realizing he's in the same position. We could present him a knockdown argument. It would be Rain Man stuff, but if we could get him to understand basic maths, his thing would be dead. And then you watch how the mind has to stay in the box. We see the Stops and I do this all the time. We speak to Muslims, we'll present them certain things, and we notice how the mind has got to stay in the box. So this idea is just doubly ironic.
Just as our mate was just on Murray, he was tasting things he never heard. And when you think about those things and you're honest with yourself.
Yeah. But you know what? My guess is with Murray, what you guys were talking about has nothing to do with why he really believes Christianity is true.
Yeah.
In my honest opinion, you guys were wasting your time with him because the real reason I'm guessing, the real reason he's a Christian is because of some amazing experience he attributes to Jesus.
Yeah, but that's a moot point. I could say amazing experience I've had reading the Quran. Is that a criterion for truth? When he threw the names Nabil Qureshi, he threw the name David Wood in, kind of an idea of where he's coming from. So
yeah, I agree.
And I'll be honest with you, so in these settings, it's not necessarily about the person we're speaking to. There could be many Christians watch that conversation who believe those same things that Murray believed, but now is questioning them themselves. So we never know who's watching. So you might say we're wasting our time with him, right? Maybe so.
Well, no,
100% there'll be Christians who believe some of the things that Murray was holding on to, and then when they got picked apart, will actually go, "Whoa, I didn't know that."
I didn't mean it as a negative critique.
No, I understand.
Because I talk to a lot of Christians as well, and I sometimes just find myself, why did we talk about that for so long when really the main issue is what they went through in summer camp, some Bible summer camp in 1995. They thought they saw a demon and someone prayed in the name of Jesus, and that's why they believe. And then they use things like eyewitness testimony and martyrdom and prophecy as ways to justify their belief. In my experience, this is what happens time and time again.
Okay, so obviously what he's talking about is his experience with Christians there, right? And how they come to believe something oftentimes on bad reasons, certainly intellectually bad reasons, and then they try to justify it afterwards. But it's the same thing with Muslims, right? The reverts we've seen, or my blasphemy there, the converts would be assuming that people are in fact Muslims and then they revert back to it. That claim, I think, has been soundly rebutted, if not refuted. So these converts, but even the other ones, haven't thought about this. especially in the beginning, right? They've heard arguments, and now they try to bring up stuff that will shore up or to makes more solid the less than well thought out original decision. And so Muslims do this as well, and even more so in my experience than Christians. But then again, that's my anecdotal view.
But yeah, we should talk about Islam because am I allowed to ask questions about Islam?
Yeah, and I wanted to say, like, I'm happy about the notion of pragmatic. I'm a philosophical pragmatist myself, and the reason that I believe in Islam is because compared to other ideologies, other religions, it's the most coherent explanation for the human experience with themselves and reality.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why that's how I would.
That's a nice 20 seconds.
I like those answers, but I would reply with a question that can something work? Like, can you, how do you say your name? Hamza or Hamza?
Yeah.
Hamza. You said it can lead to success. Islam can lead to success in your everyday life. But there's many false religions, I think, where you have examples of successful people, and yet what they believe, like Scientology, for example, there's doctors and lawyers and Tom Cruise, the famous actor, they believe in the craziest things.
I think you missed my point. I said that the most supreme successful man who's ever existed.
Okay.
Not just someone who's a successful actor who chose a particular.
Okay, so my question here would be, okay, by what standard are you saying he is the most successful? What's your criteria for that success? And if you just say he met his goals, but we can give you other people who have met their goals as well. Perhaps Jesus or whoever, right? Buddha, whatever the case is. So meeting the goals is a standard that you're not going to be able to lift him above anybody else. So what is your standard for saying that he's the most supreme guy around, right? Because ultimately he's saying to other people do the same thing.
Didn't he say, look at people who are successful, like Bill Gates?
Yeah, I think Bill Gates was mentioned and somebody else as well, right? So obviously financial success is one thing for him, but he thinks Muhammad is the most successful. But by what criteria, and why should we accept his potentially arbitrary criteria? Is there some sort of objective criteria that we can put out there that we can measure everybody against? If there isn't, then he's got a lot of work to do to say, hey, he's the most successful and here's the criteria I'm using, and you guys should use this as well, and then you come to the same conclusion, or potentially
there you have it, exactly. And this is exactly what Pinecreek is now pointing out. Okay, carry on.
Talking about, if you want to be a successful father, follow the example of Muhammad. If you want to be a successful husband, follow the example of Muhammad. If you want to be a successful businessman, successful friend, successful neighbor, successful diplomat, all of these things, we have a role model, mashallah, to set as an example for us.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what I mean by success. And I don't just mean success in this world, I mean success in the hereafter also, because this world is not it. We don't believe when you die, that's the end. We believe there's a hereafter, and this particular life is a blink of an eye. And so success is not just about this world, it's about the hereafter. So just because you're a successful actor, success, you know, if someone is not bothered about movies, they won't care who you are. If you could be a successful footballer, but someone hates football, they won't care.
Okay, but you could be a successful religious leader. If nobody cares about religion, who cares? And if you could demonstrate there was an afterlife and your afterlife was the one, and that you had to do certain things to get, the glory or whatever, then maybe, people would be potentially be interested. But A, you can't demonstrate it's true. B, you can't show that your afterlife is in fact the one. And if nobody cares about religion or his religious teachings, it's exactly the same thing as nobody caring about the movie star or anything else, right? So the standard doesn't help you, and we can apply it to Muhammad and you exactly like you can do it to everybody else.
Don't care who you are. So success in them fields is just relative.
Why would
this is the opposite of what he said earlier. He was quite clear. He says, well, we're talking about very definite success here in this life, and that is the measure, the yardstick for success. And now he's saying the opposite. No, it's not, because it can also be the hereafter. No, it doesn't have to be financial. It doesn't have to be any of that. So I don't know which it is for him.
It's entirely arbitrary for him, but he actually said relative. And what he doesn't realize, of course, is that it's exactly the same for him. That success is relative to whatever he thinks Muhammad did, that's good.
Exactly.
If Muhammad did anything he didn't like, then that presumably wouldn't be counted as success, because it's an arbitrary relative standard to whatever he's selecting. Well, of course, that's not going to be persuasive to anybody else. So somebody that tells me Muhammad's the most successful guy, we've been over this. We're going to ask the criteria and why we should accept it. And it's very unlikely they're going to give us anything substantial that would get us to go pause and go, wow, okay, that's a great criteria. Yes, let's all use that and see whether we come to the same conclusion.
Need to know about Muhammad to have success? Or why do I need Islam? A guy like me, like I'm fairly successful in my life. I'm healthy. Maybe tomorrow I'll be diagnosed with cancer. I don't know, and I'll find Islam. But at the moment, I'm content in life. I don't feel a need for Islam. Why do I need Islam?
What's going to happen to you when you die?
Okay, great question, right? Because all of the things that Hamza given, he's saying, well, I've got success in every way that's measurable to me at this moment in time, right? Because Hamza went through all these other successes, and he's going, okay, so what is there that I'm missing essentially, right? And that's, I think, a good question.
Now, the thing is, I've asked this question a couple of times, but I've never received an answer. And unfortunately, the same is going to happen here again, and he doesn't follow through, unfortunately.
When you die.
Okay, so the question that we might have missed there is, Hamza asked in response, his question was, what am I missing that Islam will give me? And Hamza's response was, what will happen when you die? Now, again, we've just got to pause here for a moment and go, is that a substantial response? Now, I know maybe it's beating a dead horse, and almost never does Hamza give a substantial response, but I just want to highlight this again and underline it, use those terms. Asking somebody a question is not a substantial response. If you need a clarifying question, fine. If Hamza didn't understand it, or there's something that he wanted to get from Pinecreek to give a good answer, fine. I'm okay with clarifying questions. What I'm not okay with is asking a question when you've been asked a question and somebody's expecting a response, right? So my immediate response here is, I asked you, what am I missing? Right? And to ask me what happens in an afterlife, you're presupposing there's an afterlife, which you can't demonstrate. But even if there was, you can't demonstrate that you've got the right answer to that. And even if you could demonstrate that, what about it? You don't know if you're going to heaven. I don't know if you're going to heaven. And some people think that atheists can go to heaven without even being Muslim. So what about that? So this is just a terrible response, as is often the case.
I don't know. Now, I don't believe in any hell, but is this why I should become is this Hamza, is this the main reason why you think I should become a Muslim, so I avoid some type of negative afterlife?
Bam!
No, I believe it's part of it, of course. But no, the reason you should be a Muslim is to take an objective moral guide into your life that will protect you from all the harmful things in society and encourage you towards the good things, like I said. Okay,
right, good. So it's like part of it, but it wasn't the main thing, right? So he even demonstrates, because he didn't listen clearly the first time, that question he asked him wasn't even the main answer to you. So Pinecreek very cleverly said, is that the reason that I should become a Muslim? And he was like, no, because that's what he originally asked, right? Why should I be a Muslim? So just asking the question again gets him to now give the reason, right? Because you have an objective moral standard. But interestingly enough, he doesn't say because it's true or likely to be true. But his claim is that you have a moral standard. And here, of course, you could jump on the objective moral claim, of course, and go down that route. But he's not very good at that. So the only person that could maybe answer that might be Asadullah from his philosophical thing. But even then, you and I talked about this stuff. It doesn't matter how much philosophical training you've got. If you are lumbered, or if you are you're carrying the weight of the Quran on your shoulders, the philosophy is not really going to help, other than you might be able to use some philosophical terms to bamboozle people, but you're weighted down by having to appeal to the Quran. If you let go of the Quran, you have the freedom to then put forward the ideas. Great. But that's hopefully, and I don't think he does, as you point out, go after, hey, this objective standard. Because that for me would have been an opening, right, off we go down that route.
Okay, but in my life, I haven't experienced much harm. I've had a pretty cushy life compared to other people on the planet, for sure.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to stop with you. You might have children. Who's going to guide them? Society's going to guide them.
The question is, why should I take on Islam? What does it do for me? Not that maybe in the future I need to train my children or something. Come on. Yes, this is this getting worse.
But this, of course, is a response, right? If it's not for you, then maybe it's for your children. But if he's living a good life and he's happy, what's to say that he's going to not train his children to be the same? And hopefully they will have the same good fortune that he did. So again, even if you appeal to the children, right? Because what he's looking for here, of course, what Hamza's looking for is something that he can go, that's what Islam can for. But at the moment, Pinecreek is, it's like smooth sailing. There's nothing there that he's missing that Islam said, right? When he tried the afterlife, even on second thoughts, when he asked the question again, that wasn't really the main thing. I think he realizes they're trying to show that there's an afterlife is a fool's errand. But what he's looking for is a gap here. They can go, that's what you're missing. That's what Islam will do for you. And so because Pinecreek hasn't got that, it's now appeal to the children. But again, so why would he need the children need it if they're going to have a similarly good life to Pinecreek?
And the thing is, I don't know why he doesn't pass it off to Asadullah, or maybe even get Shabir in there or something, or let Imran derail it. Why does he think, or why is he so intent on answering himself when he really has nothing to offer? He must himself realize, I am way out of my depth here.
No, of course not. Otherwise, he wouldn't be speaking. People, like if I was at if we had a cosmologist in here, I wouldn't be challenging him on cosmology. I'd be listening and learning. Even if I maybe disagreed on something, I wouldn't go, hey, you're wrong on this or whatever the case is, because I'm, but again, I think it's a difference in, the ability to introspection, I think is a powerful tool that many people don't seem to be able to employ. Go, hang on a moment, maybe I'm not the right person for this. And because he's having the conversation with Hamza, of course, the other guys are quiet because Hamza's the loudest and brashest and so forth. And so it's very rare that they're going to interrupt. And I think it's his show anyway. So he's the host and they sort of just keep quiet. But it would have been good to hear from some of the other people here, because he doesn't have much to say. And I think Pinecreek's answered quite well. So there isn't a gap here that goes, hey, my first thing is, hey, because it's true. And let me give you the reasons why it's true. Interestingly, it wasn't for him. It's the objective morals after he tried the afterlife thing, which was, even in his retrospect, not the most important reason.
And society is going downhill fast.
But I'm sure you guys, I've said this to Christians, I'm sure you guys know Muslims, maybe even some of your friends, whose lives are a mess. Am I wrong?
To be honest with you, it's all about whether, it's not just because you're a Muslim doesn't mean life is perfect. The two things. First thing, are you following the teachings of Islam is one thing. Second thing, we're told as Muslims that you're going to be tested. We believe Allah tests those whom he loves most. And the prophets of the past were tested, so why wouldn't we be tested? So,
isn't that interesting, that concession? He tests those who he loves the most. So the implication is, if you go with that line of reasoning, that people who don't experience the test, i.e. that have a reasonably good life, like Pinecreek, if there was a Muslim version of Pinecreek, they aren't being tested. And so God then presumably loves them least. So is it the case that Muslims who, quote unquote, we don't even know what the test is, but let's assume that it's some sort of test where life is uncomfortable, just use that blanket word. Is it the case that the more uncomfortable you are as a Muslim, the greater the test, and then the greater, the God's love for you is? If that's the case, and I knew, or I was convinced there was an afterlife, I'm going to make myself uncomfortable and ask to be tested more. Because as these guys point out, this is the blink of an eye. Why am I going to sit comfortably if I know that God loves me less? I want to get out there and I want to be tested more. Because ultimately, even if I die, at some point during the test, I'm going to be in heaven forever. I mean, it's an extraordinary admission that I don't think he really understands the implications of this, because then he wouldn't be on here. He'd be going out there testing himself, with these fellow Muslims that are dying of, going to China. I mean, what kind of, that would be an ultimate test. Go try to free your fellow Muslims that are being held captive in China. Is there a more worthy test for a Muslim to try and free his brethren? If you're not doing that, you're not being tested enough. I mean, it's extraordinary.
And in my eyes, what is happening is, if we take the previous claims he made, he's digging himself in deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yeah, he hasn't thought these things through. And it's unlikely that he's ever spoken to somebody that has explained to him, because none of these guys are saying anything about this, right? But the implications of this are quite mind-boggling if you think about it. But again, I'm not sure that Pinecreek will necessarily challenge him on this, but that implication is just extraordinary.
So, but we believe in the adage of, through the iron goes through the fire to become steel. If you want the best part of the olive, you need to crush it to get the oil. So sometimes human beings, we grow through adversity. So adversity is not necessarily a bad thing, I don't believe.
But if someone wanted to say something?
No, you can finish the point.
Well, Hamza, you brought up afterlife. Like, could I be okay excluding the afterlife if I didn't become a Muslim? Like, I could probably... Yeah, I still could be successful in my career, and I could still raise my kids to not steal and lie and cheat. Okay.
Yeah, of course you could. See, here's the difference. You see, I'll give you an example. I was speaking to some ladies from, here in England, white council state, pretty rough, pretty anti-Islamic, and she was talking about her son interested in Islam, and I was saying, "Oh wow, that's fantastic." She goes, "What do you mean it's fantastic?" I says, well, at least he's not going to come home and say, Mum, I'm gay, or Mum, I'm a drug addict, or I'm an alcoholic, or is going to treat you badly, on all of these things. And the woman, she gave,
Okay, but the problem is, and I can hear stops going in the background there, but the problem is, as Pinecreek pointed out, that there are Muslims that do those sort of things anyway. And then all that Hamza can say is, oh, well, they're just being bad Muslims. So you're not guaranteed that if you accept Islam that you're going to be this perfect person. I mean, you might be better off about it, but there are Muslims that drink and smoke and do all of those things today here in the UK, living next door to him, and Islam obviously hasn't helped them overcome that. Right. So, but then the response, like I say, is just, well, they're bad Muslims. Well, great. So, but then don't say that he's not going to do that. You don't know somebody's life. Maybe they will not do it, but there's a chance they can still do it. Right? So that's not particularly helpful as far as I can tell.
But look at his opinion where he says, well, if he's interested in Islam, at least he's not going to come home and say, I'm gay.
Yeah, well, of course, for them, that's a sin, right? But even if he was gay, like, we know some Muslims are, they've got to just sort of try and hide their, natural tendency, which these guys are probably going to think is not natural, but they can't demonstrate that. So, yeah, I think, but the other thing that he said as well, then again, he mentioned about his children and stuff like that, right? And Hamza agreed that they could still all be good anyway and have a good life. So really, it's like, what he's doing is very subtly showing Hamza that there really isn't anything appealing to this. And because Hamza hasn't said, because it's true, and argued for the veracity of it, i.e. the truth of Islam, he's now left with trying to argue other things which Pinecreek can say, well, that's not a concern for me or whatever. But if he had to argue the truth, and Pinecreek couldn't really argue and say, well, the truth isn't important, then what the hell is he doing on here, right? So he never hit him with what I think would have been the strongest thing. And very seldom do Muslims do that, interesting enough. Say, hey, the most important reason is because it's true. Right? They just don't do that. And here's a prime example. He didn't come out of the gate with what I think is the strongest thing that you ought to do. Otherwise, if somebody's not interested in the truth, why are they having this conversation?
I think all he's doing actually is just sort of showing that this is the only argument that I've heard from him, just hedging his bets, just in case there's an afterlife. Let me believe, just in case. And that's silly. We know that.
No, she gave an answer. She says, yeah, he doesn't need to be a Muslim to do all of those things. And I said, yeah, that's true. But Islam guarantees it. So this is the thing, you see. If you
clearly, we've just shown that Islam doesn't guarantee it. And Pinecreek said that they're Muslims that are in a bad way, and these guys agreed. So clearly, Islam doesn't guarantee it. You only think it does, or it claims to want to do that. But humans are humans, and they all err anyway. So there's no guarantee, even if you accept Islam, that you're going to be this perfect person. And there's many people who deconvert after being Muslims as well. So there's no guarantees of any of this sort of stuff. So these strong claims is just him blowing smoke, right? There's no evidence that that's the case. And what he could do at best is point to some anecdotal evidence that he currently knows of now. But if you have to look at numbers, I don't think that necessarily supports his view.
You see who's here?
Follow the teachings of
Yeah.
the Islam. You can never fall into any of these poisons. So you might say, I've had a nice life, this, that, the other. Your life ain't over yet, and circumstances can change tomorrow. And then what? So following the teachings of Islam as your guide will protect you from those poisons. Definitely alcohol, drugs, gambling, all this sexual immoralities and all this kind of stuff. It'll protect you. Women won't be have to be afraid of being of the Me Too movement, for example. Yeah, no Muslim.
Okay, well, how about women who aren't afraid to show their faces out in public and not have men who want to do things to them? And by the way, I don't smoke, do any of those things that Hamza says. I'm not a Muslim. And I'm sure Stops doesn't do that either. And many of the viewers here do all of these things that are good as well. And we're not Muslims. What does that say? That says that you can do all of these things and you don't have to be a Muslim. But you could be a Muslim and still do all of those things. So this line of argumentation really is very weak, to say the least.
Oh, and Rob, by the way, when I did smoke weed, where was this? In Tehran.
Oh, okay. I didn't know you did that. There you go, you see. And in a strict Muslim. But it stops again. They're not real Muslims and they're not following the true Quran and Islam true. You know the story, right?
Sexually harass a woman by default. Yeah. So That's what I'm talking. I'm not talking about you could live a perfectly good life. You could be a nice guy. This, that, the other.
Isn't that interesting, though? The reason women have to veil up in Islam is because they are likely to be harassed by who? Other Muslim men. Because if other Muslim men treated them well and had a high regard for them, they would allow them the freedom to blossom and to be who they are, to wear what they like or not, and they would be fine with it. Interesting, isn't it, that they have to dress up, they have to hide themselves away from their own people.
But come on, we've all heard the stories where women, even on Hajj or something, like running around the Kaaba and they're being molested. They're being felt up and people, patting them on the bum and things like that.
By fellow Muslims, right? And they're still all veiled up. So clearly, Islam is not the answer to these things. And it's the fact that men can't control themselves that women have to veil up. Instead of men being, quote-unquote, good Muslims, and allowing women the freedom to choose what they want to wear, how they want to express themselves, because men have got the discipline not to do any of these things so that women can feel free. And in fact, what has to happen? Women have got to veil themselves up because men can't control them. But yet Islam is the way to go.
And
that would be fine if we could show that all these men were so well disciplined and women had all this freedom. Then you could actually make a case, wow, Islam does something here that keeps these men on the straight path. These women are free to do whatever. They can walk out at night without the thought of being molested or chased or whistled after or whatever. But what, as you point out, even in Hajj, in the supposedly holiest place, it's still happening there. So clearly Islam is not the answer to this sort of thing. And it's exactly the opposite of what we would expect if it was, in fact, the answer that actually kept men disciplined and on track and put women on a pedestal.
And the thing is that I tell the people regularly that my level of morality is much higher than that of a Muslim because I don't do good for a reward and I don't not do bad because I'm afraid of the punishment. I can do all these things out of my own free steam. I don't need to be told by a 1,000-year-old book what to do and what not to do. I can be decent and I can be a good human being, supportive and productive within the society without reading about it in some old book, which also tells me that I'm allowed to have as many concubines as I want, which also tells me I can keep slaves and I can beat my wife and I can do all sorts of things. But those things I need to be selective of. There I cannot refer to the book. Then they say, well, you're getting it wrong. You are misinterpreting the book. It's only when it's good things that they deem to be good that then they need the book. It's so strange.
Yeah, absolutely. The other question I often ask them, and I very seldom get an answer, who is better, the person who does good deeds for the sake of it or the person who requires a book or a god to tell them to do a good deed? Which of those two is morally better? Sometimes I'll ask that question. Very seldom will a Muslim give me a straight answer, and I wonder why. I think it's pretty obvious why it's the case. So they don't want to admit that the person who doesn't need to be told what to do or to have some sort of afterlife punishment in order to do a good thing is not as good as the person who does it out of their own or for the concern of their fellow human being.
What the hell is happening in the chat at the moment? Do you see this? Oh shit, that down, that. But this shalamihala, do you know SVG does this?
Let's not sidetrack with it. I've just timed that out. Otherwise, we just.
This is shalamihala got me going.
So what? You'll get through it. But there's no guarantees. And there's no guarantee your children will follow your example because they're going to get corrupted by this society.
Right. And there's no guarantees for...
Their kids are going to take control. So that's the thing. And kids don't like to be told by other people, or not even kids, just people don't like to be told by other people what to do. I hate to be told what to do by other people.
But you're okay being told what to do by a 100-year-old book. Yeah. But now we're onto a bit of a ramble right now.
And he's digging himself deeper and deeper all the time.
Yeah, but he thinks, because Pinecreek is so amicable, he thinks that this is an opportunity for him to sort of preach, right? And
I would be jumping up and down by now.
Yeah, I don't have quite so much space, only because I know him. I'll normally give people some leeway and so forth, give them an opportunity. But when I see this sort of rambling, I'm going to jump in here.
But my creator, I surrender myself to. So the only one I would submit myself to is my creator.
Why?
And why? Because that's the only one worthy of submitting surrendering to. He's the one who created me. He's the one who knows me inside out. He knows what benefits me and what harms me because he created me. Therefore, I'd be stupid not to follow that guidance. I'd actually be pathetic not to follow that guidance.
But someone, like, let's say you could have a creator deity who might not know the best for you. He just created you, and he doesn't even care about you.
That's the problem again. I don't believe in that deity that you characterized.
Okay, the challenge that I wish Pinecreek had followed that up. How can you establish that that's not the deity that you currently believe in? Just because the book tells you it's not doesn't mean that it's not. Right? So how do you establish that that deity isn't some sort of evil deity or a deity that's tricking you or pulling the wool over your eyes? It seems to me you've got no way to establish that because you cannot appeal to the book. So what else have you got to appeal to? You haven't got anything else. And if you appeal to something outside of that, well, then you bring in your own standards by which you judge this deity, and therefore the whatever the deity itself says is irrelevant. So it's a shame he didn't go this route. I don't think he does.
A caricature, shall I say? I believe in a creator that created everything, knows everything, every intimate thing, and therefore,
when you say he knows everything, do you believe that he knows? Like, let's say it's true from Allah's perspective that when I die, I'll go to a negative afterlife. You call it hell, correct?
Right.
Let's say he knows I will go to hell. Is there anything I can do right now to become a Muslim if he knows I will go to hell?
Yeah, my brother Imran has a beautiful adage here. Things don't happen because it's written because it happened. So you'll know you're going to hell.
Yeah, I mean that's a deepity as Daniel Dennett says. It sounds profound, but actually doesn't have any substance to it, right? Occasionally people will come up with these things that sound wonderful to the ear, but if you stop to examine it, it doesn't really have anything substantive that it rests upon. It's just like a nice little meme of a saying that doesn't actually reflect anything substantive.
Because of the way you've lived your life. So you knowing you're going to hell will be after you've lived and died. So it's not a case of you can change your destiny.
Okay, but of course he doesn't understand the question. He asked, if God is all-knowing, is there anything I can do? If he knows I'm going to hell, is there anything I can do about this? And because Hamza doesn't understand the question, he goes off and says, well, you can change your destiny. How can you change your destiny if God knows what your destiny is? Right, which is kind of the line that he's going down now. But Hamza's just doesn't understand it. Is utterly unprepared to deal with this in any substantial way.
Exactly.
And Allah's foreknowledge dependent on a mere mortal like me, my choices? And isn't that then I got the power, not Allah, to...
No. You can choose whatever you like. Whatever you choose, Allah knows what you're going to choose.
He doesn't realize at all the problem with this, of course. He just this utterly goes over his head, right? This sort of paradox. Now, this is where Asadullah Ali or somebody else could come in here and maybe they can try and come up with an idea. But his response just tells us, and it's interesting, right? When you hear somebody's response, it tells you a lot about the person. Did they understand my question? Do they understand the implications of it? And have they got something that they can respond with that is even remotely worth discussing or substantial?
Before I was even born, before I was even conceived, he knew what I would choose.
Yeah.
But then if he knows what I will choose, then I will choose that. Otherwise, he knew wrong, correct?
No, you knew to choose that because that's what you chose.
Yeah. But I haven't chosen.
Okay, can you see that it just it goes right over Hamza's head? He really doesn't understand this at all. So it'd be pointless having a further discussion about this. When you get to somebody like that, it's like, can you move on? To me, again, it's easy to sit here and talk about it. Afterwards, I would say, okay, guys, I don't think you're quite getting it. Is there any other Muslim that wants to deal with this? Can somebody else jump in here? Because I don't think Hamza's getting it. Now, he might not take kindly to that, but it's clear that it's just like going right over his head at this stage.
Chosen it yet?
No,
because I wasn't born.
But of course, from Allah, the paradigm of Allah, you have. He's seen it.
Yeah, this is a similar answer I get for Christians as well. But my response to it is, does the choice exist yet? How can Allah know something that doesn't exist yet?
How?
Yeah.
Because he does.
Can I just say something very quickly? I know I've come to the conversation.
You're perfect at this point, actually.
Conversation, and I know the brothers had things to say as well. So I think I'm not sure exactly what question you're discussing, but lots of topics have come up. And we're not nailing any one of them down, really. We're sort of flitting from one to the other. And even in this
Now
sort
listen
of setup,
to this.
Pinecreek, I don't know your actual name, so I'm going to refer to
Doug. You can call me Doug or Pinecreek.
Doug.
Either's
Yeah,
fine.
Doug. So Doug, in your conception that you're putting forward of this, the foreknowledge is therefore mean the foreknowledge of God therefore means that human beings don't have free will. It's basically a caricature of what Muslims understand of the scenario. So it's not actually what we believe. So that's probably a good discussion to have. But it seems like you went through sort of morality and guidance, and then there probably was something before that.
Well, no, Doug actually didn't go through morality. Hamza did. He said, hey, you get objective morals if you believe in God. Remember at the very beginning, he said, the question was, why do I need Islam? He said, do you believe in an afterlife, which wasn't a response. And then he said, what's the most important thing, or why should I believe in Islam again? And then he said there was objective moral. So it was brought up by Hamza as his, certainly one of, if not the most important, presumably the thing that you're going to speak about mostly, or in the beginning, is going to be the most important reason somebody ought to consider Islam. Right? For me, it would be if I was a Muslim, because it's likely to be true, and I want to guide you towards truth. Do you care about truth? Great. Well, this is the way to do it. Right? That would be my opening gambit if I were a Muslim. But clearly, it wasn't his. So it wasn't that Doug brought it up. It was brought up by Hamza, and then they went off down that route.
And I don't know your background. So are you a Christian, an atheist? What's your position?
I was a Christian, not like Murray. I think I knew more than he did, but I was a Christian for 3 decades. Murray. Yeah, I was a Christian for about 30 years. I started doubting in my mid-30s. I don't say that there can't be a God or there definitely is no God. I just don't live my life like there is any type of deity.
I just want to point out here, I'm seeing a lot of the spam. So if you're watching this, please don't spam the chat. We're going to time you out. If you continue to do it, we will block you from the channel.
I'm blocking him now.
Okay, I don't want you to spam with all these icons and stuff. We can't see the chat. It's unhelpful. That's the only reason that we're going to block you here. I don't mind what you say, but what I don't want is for you to spam the channel over and over again with something that isn't of any value at all. Ask a question, make any comment you like. Just don't have icons and hearts and all the rest of it. That's the one proviso that it doesn't help us in this discussion. So if you want to do that sort of trollish behavior, then unfortunately this is not the place for you.
I think all religions of the world are man-made, humans' way to survive, to cope, to give meaning and purpose in their life.
Okay, I understand that. That's probably quite a common journey, particularly from a religion like Christianity. And I know I'm sort of pushing a few buttons here for people, but I can understand that. And Brother Asadullah has been through this journey already because he comes from a previous, a Catholic background, brother, is that right?
Orthodox.
Yeah. So I'm sure you could sort of enlighten us a little bit more on that. But what was for you the doubts that led you away from theism, not specifically Christianity?
What he's doing now is a Shabir shuffle, because he is now going back and asking him, what is the reason for you? What are you doing? He came here to ask the Muslims, and now what Imran is doing is derailing the whole thing. The whole discussion was going quite well, and now he's doing the Shabir shuffle, turning it around and asking the guy who's calling in to ask the questions about his motivation. And unfortunately, he doesn't know about this tactic, and unfortunately, he's going to answer because he's polite.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is a common tactic, right? These guys don't want to defend for too long. They want to turn it around, right? But this is something that you and I are quite finely tuned towards. If we go in there with a critique, that's what we want to discuss. Nothing else. We don't want to be asked about our worldview. What do we think about X, Y, and Z? If I level a critique, I'm going to tell you what I think and why I think it, and then I'm going to ask you to respond to it. And asking me about other things is irrelevant, right? Because as you pointed out, this is a diversionary tactic. They're looking for something that he will say that they can go down a different line from. And I think you're right. It's a case of him staying on track, and if he's got some questions he wants to ask, then asking and saying, hey, you know what? I don't think that's worth discussing. I came on here to do this. Can I ask these questions? I'm not really. Yeah, exactly. I didn't come on here to answer X, Y, and Z question, right? But again, very amicable and so forth, and answering some of the questions. But you're right. I think Imran's just sort of going off on a tangent here. And it's a shame that the other guys, or at least Asadullah maybe, didn't answer any of the questions that Pinecreek originally asked, right, about Islam, because I think that's what, he came on and said, well, let's talk about Islam, right? That was his thing, to ask some questions.
You're going to love this answer. What caused me to start doubting Christianity was to start thinking like a Muslim, to start thinking like a Jew, to start thinking like a Mormon, to start thinking like an atheist. I started putting myself in the shoes of you guys and trying to understand, well, of course the Gospels were written by eyewitnesses. Why would anybody? Oh, you're right. There is no first person accounts. No one says, I, Matthew, wrote the Gospel of Matthew. You're not going to find his name in the Gospel. I started understanding you guys.
Just notice there, I was watching the guys while he was saying this, right? If you look at this back again, if you're watching this afterwards, they were all nodding. But I think the very smart thing he did is I started to think like a Muslim, like a Jew, like a Christian, right? The inference is that I stepped out of my worldview and I started to look at it as if I was somebody else, right? Now, the hidden inference here is you guys should do the same. Right? He's not saying that, but there's an inference. You guys should maybe do the same thing. But they're nodding along because he said, I started to think like you guys. So in their head, it's like, he's like us. But actually, there's a deeper inference there, which is, hey, maybe you should do what I did, which is step out and look at it as a Christian, as an atheist, as an agnostic, as a Hindu, whatever. Look at your religion from the outside. Right?
Do you remember the definition of diplomacy?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, I could Google it, but not off the top of my head.
It's the way to tell somebody to go to hell so that they look forward to the trip.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. And I think that he's definitely got a very nice way of doing this here. And they just don't realize the inference that's in there. That's why I wanted to explicitly say this, right? I started to think like da-da-da-da-da, right? And he ended up with Muslim, right?
But then the punchline is there. That's nice.
Yeah.
And then once you can put yourself in the other people's shoes and look at and critique your own worldview and biases, it's very easy, I think, after that to have that all crumble.
They're still nodding.
But for a lot of people, they can't.
Yeah. Right. The inferences, of course, they go, yeah, that's about Christianity, but at no time does any one of these five guys' brain engage and go, hang on, maybe I should do the same with Islam. Because they're so convinced it's true, but just like the Christians, the Hindus, they're also convinced it's true as well. Until you do something like Pinecreek, which is you step out of it and you start to ask yourself, hey, how's it possible this Quran could be from the Word of God where there's irrefutable errors in there? It can't be the case. And if I was intellectually honest and you brought me these errors and you didn't tell me it's in the Quran, I would straight out of the gate agree that this is completely erroneous. But then tell me it's in the Quran. Now suddenly see what happens. Now I have to defend it. I still want to do this sometimes with a Muslim where I don't tell them that it's from the Quran and get them to agree and then show them that it comes out of the Quran and then see how the brain U-turns to try and defend it. Right? But it's really well done the way he's doing it, and they're all nodding along because they should be doing the same thing, but of course they don't realize it.
They can't do that because there's just too much at stake. Like my wife's still a Christian. I've been
Same
married
for
for
them.
26 years, and you're entrenched. It's like all your friends and family
Same
are
for
Christian.
them,
It's
right?
not easy just to give it up.
Yeah, that sounds tough. Yeah. In terms of your putting yourself in the so it sounds like you're more of an agnostic atheist rather than an atheist hardcore. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay, so you believe that there's a possibility that God could exist.
correct.
Okay, so have you put yourself in the position of the theist and thought about the implications of either side of that story?
Oh, God.
Yes.
Okay, so have you
Clearly he has, because he's that sort of person that
Exactly.
stepped out of it, right? And he knows what it's like in there. He's now out of it, right? But the real question that Imran should be asking, have you done it, Imran, and stepped out of it and made yourself an atheist and looked at your religion critically like we do, or like atheists do, or Hindus or whatever? Have you done that? Interesting that he would never think to, that thought would never cross his mind, but he would ask the other guy who originally said, yes, I've sort of done that.
Have you heard any? I'm sure. Sorry, this is me coming late to the discussion. Have any of the brothers gone through any of the implications of being an atheist? What that would mean for you, or have you? I'm sure you have.
That's
Do you
not
think there
the
are any
topic.
ramifications of being an atheist in terms of?
Correct. Yeah. So now it's been switched around to the implications of atheism. Look, these guys are utterly unequipped to challenge atheism, and I think we've seen that before. Now people can challenge atheism, but I just think that these guys, maybe Asadullah, I don't know, but certainly the other guys are very poorly equipped to try and challenge atheism, as we've seen in other streams. So the implications that they think are problematic really aren't, because they don't understand the full implications. But as you say, they've now turned this around to go, hey, you've got to really look at your worldview. When he came to speak about Islam, we see they do this time and time and time again, right? Turn it on the interlocutor, so now the interlocutor has to defend. And we're hoping that these sort of streams will help us, help you see this. And if you're ever in a discussion, don't allow this to happen. Unless you want to do that. If you go in there and say, hey, I want to talk about what I believe, great. But if you go in there to talk about or to find out about Islam and you end up answering questions about your worldview, you know that you're falling into the trap and you need to turn it around if you want to continue to challenge Islam.
Of explaining anything, either your existence or your consciousness or your morality or anything really. What, have you thought about those? And
Yes, I have.
okay, so pick for me. I don't want to impose myself on you. So I think
Which you're doing anyway.
I want to overbear a little bit. So I'm going to ask the brothers if your brother Asad.
Okay, so here I would just go, you know what, I appreciate you want to do this. Maybe there's another stream where you guys do this. Can we do this another time? I've come in here to ask questions about Islam. I speak to some Muslims, but you guys seem like you do this all the time, so you might have better answers than I've heard from other Muslims. Do you mind if we go back to talking about Islam, and let me ask you some questions on Islam? Right? That's
Yeah, but
kind of where I would go. Well, I would have done it earlier, but I would certainly go here because now the
Rob,
whole
listen-
thing is trying to be turned.
listen to the punchline now.
Sidala, if you could give me your perspective on any one of those three things, so either how we can explain the universe existing as it is, or of consciousness, or you can pick any one, or morality,
Sure.
and what the implications would be for either position, theist and atheist. Can we explain any of these in a reasonable way?
Did you hear what he just said? He changed the topic completely and said, I'm out of this, and he's tagging Asadullah Ali now. You take over and address any one of those.
Yeah, I don't know why.
Now listen to what happens now.
And then we can, and I hope brothers can join in, Sean. And Brother Shabir, Assalamu alaikum, brothers. I didn't say salam if you didn't hear me.
Walaikum assalam, Doctor. Thanks for joining us.
I think the biggest issue is the first cause arguments. Like, where did we come from? Why are we here? Why is there something rather than
And
nothing?
he takes it,
I think from the theist point of view, I totally get it. Not just to think about specific theism, but in general, something outside of time, outside of space, something powerful, maybe even something personal, would have to create the universe and to give order to what we see today. Now, you can still believe in evolution, you can believe in common descent and all these things, but there still has to be a guiding force behind it. So I get that. So that's a quick summary. From my point of view, the atheist point of view, I would say that just like a god, a deity would be necessary from your point of view, I would say the cosmos, the universe in itself would have to be necessary, and it's just a brute fact. It is what it is. We all need a starting point. The starting point for the theist is God. The starting point for a naturalist would be that the universe just exists, has the properties that it has. And why is it that way? It'd be the same type of question as asking, why is Allah's nature the way it is and not something else? It just is. You can't ask that question. Well, you can ask it, but it has no answer. And
I love the part there where he says, well, Allah's nature is just the way it is, right? Because if you had to ask a thoughtful Muslim, how is it that Allah has the properties he does? They would say, well, I can't answer that. He just has those properties. And so I think that pointing that out, because if they're going to say, well, hey, the universe could have been different. Well, could Allah have been different? Yeah. So I think that small part in there, I think, is quite good. But he is off answering questions. Actually, he didn't realize that. I think Imran was asking Asadullah to come in, so he's responded instead of Asadullah, which is But I like that part about just throwing in that little bit. Why has Allah got these properties, right? He's got the properties because he couldn't have anything else.
So you can hear that he has a lot of experience with talking to apologists. Yeah.
Again, you could go down that route. Does he have the properties he does because he couldn't have something else? Was he chosen to have these properties, etc., right? So
does he have free will?
Yeah.
I would say the same goes for our existence and the existence of the universe. Does that make sense?
I understand your position. Brother Asadullah, what are your thoughts? Because there's lots to say on this, I think.
He admits defeat.
So prior, I want to agree with you that you said religion is, it helps people to survive. It helps people to find meaning. I agree with that assessment. I also disagree with your assessment that you don't live your life as though there is a deity. And so let me expound on what I mean by these two things. Human beings form societies on the basis of believing in values that are not arbitrary. At least they don't think so. They may say it, but they don't act that way. Societies don't function on the basis of believing that everyone simply agrees on things that they want to do. They all have this idea in their head that murder is in fact a wrong that has no origin really from man, but is something that we all agree upon.
No, I disagree. I mean, origin. Where else would the origin come from if not from man? And I think what I do agree with is that all of us, and I include all of them, has well-being as our standard. Even if you don't label it as such, whatever other moral system you come with, if we ask enough questions, it foundationally will come to something that is basically synonymous with well-being. So that part is true, but that's because of the nature of how we've come to be from an evolutionary point of view, right? We have pain.
Exactly, it's a human
we
thing.
want to move towards pleasure. It's the way that we've kind of come about through the forces that are acting on matter and energy over billions of years, and we are the result of that. And so when you say it's not arbitrary, it is arbitrary in the sense that, if you believe the universe could have been different, presumably these guys, I would imagine, think the universe could have been different if Allah had so chosen. And if that were the case, and we had the same consciousness but inside robot bodies, or we were Colossus or Wolverine, then that wouldn't have been a concern for us because we couldn't have been harmed in any way. And so our considerations would have been completely different. And so I don't think that it's a deity, and B, it's arbitrary depending on whether you believe that the universe is the case, but yes, we don't live our lives as if murder is okay. But that's also begging the question, because murder is, of course, the unjustified killing. What does it mean to be unjustified? We go down that route. But most of us believe that, hurting children or whatever is wrong, right? But if we have to argue why we think it's wrong, at this point we have to invoke certain arguments for that. We all kind of think that it's wrong because we underlying have this idea of well-being being something that is important for our continued existence and thriving. So, yeah, I don't fully agree with what he's saying there.
And is beyond ourselves. What I want to say in general is, if we're talking about the success of things, we're talking about the pragmatics of it all. There has never been an anti-supernatural civilization in human history. One that at least has functioned long enough to be remembered.
Well, it depends what you mean by anti-supernatural. If you mean something like they don't believe in a supernatural entity, well, of course we do. The Piraha
Exactly.
of the Amazon jungle, as one example. I'm sure there's others. If you're going to weaken the claim, if you're going to do the Mott and Bailey type view, which is, hey, I'm going to make a strong claim. When you overrun that claim, I'm going to retreat to a weaker claim that I can defend much easier. Which would, I'm not saying he would do that, but we know of a particular Muslim who does that quite well. Well, then you could try that, but then we're going to point that out. So yes, I think there are civilizations or tribes or people who don't have any supernatural views, have never had that, as far as we can tell, and still survive and thrive. And in fact, when Daniel Everett, I think it was, who was the person who went to visit the Piraha, said they live most of their life, they enjoy life, etc. They go hunt when they need to, they live in the moment, etc. Yes, they believe that there's Mother Earth and there's some sort of spirits and stuff, but no overriding creator of everything, right? They don't have that view at all. So
I mean,
yeah.
he lost his belief.
Correct. He was Christian. He tried to convert them. They asked him, very basic questions that got him to reevaluate his position, and he became an atheist because of that, right? So we do know of civilizations like that.
Because human beings require this understanding or this perspective of transcendent value, of something beyond themselves to unite upon and to live by. So
no, that's not true. All we need is to agree upon certain things based on a particular goal. And if we have this goal, whether it's a collective goal that we have through our evolutionary upbringing, or whether it's something we agree on, all we need is to have that goal, and then we're off and running. And it doesn't have to be transcendent. And in fact, you can't demonstrate that it is transcendent.
Yeah, but he loves the word.
Yeah, of course, it sounds good, but I think he's standing on very weak ground there to try and defend that.
When you say, for example, that I don't live my life as though a deity exists, perhaps as in recognizing a person or a specific being, but in reality you do in some respects.
Bullshit.
Because you behave in such a way like other human beings do. Naturally, we behave this way. It's not something that we voluntarily do. I think you agree upon these values. You agree that there's values that are not just chosen by you, that there's something that we have to abide by in order to function as society.
No, that's nonsense.
Okay, but there you go. Function as a society, right? That's not a deity. So when he says you act like there's a deity, my immediate question is, what do you mean by a deity then? You're obviously not meaning a supernatural entity. So now you are muddying the waters with what you mean by deity. So you can
exactly. They don't like it.
That's a very weak point to now redefine deity to mean, hey, something that we take to be pragmatically valuable to allow us to thrive and survive. No, well, that's not a deity.
They can't handle the concept of deity. They don't know what to do with it, because for them it's neither here nor there, and they can't wrap their head around the fact that you can have the possibility as a model of as a concept of a deity coming in and then not caring anymore that it's just a byproduct of something, and they cannot get this into their heads.
Yeah.
Like there's something about us that is definitively human, right? Beyond animals, beyond inanimate objects.
Wow.
Right? Morality, rationality, these things are not just arbitrary constructs. These are things that we have to live by in order to be human, right?
No, we don't. No, we don't. And in fact, we've got examples of people that are, quote, human, who don't live by those things, that are pathological or psychopaths or whatever the case is, right, who don't follow these things. So, but then the question is, what does it mean to be human? Right now again, these are wishy-washy words that he's throwing out there, and there's no definition. What does it mean to be human by his lights? Again, some arbitrary definition, but he's exactly the one who's claiming it's not arbitrary. Well, by what standard? If you're going to say that it's something that's objective, what is it that's objective, and what is the criteria you are using to get you to the subjective thing, right?
Right. Even the concept of rights, what does that even mean? Like, we can we can say to ourselves, yeah, this is something we came up with to survive by, but nobody behaves that way.
But it's not just for survival, it's for thriving as well, right? A lot of these guys get the idea that whatever you have is purely for survival. No, it's not for survival. I think it's Harris has said it and others have said it, right? I think the term that Harris uses is we've flown the coop that evolution has set for us, meaning that we no longer are only concerned with our survival. We're now concerned with our thriving, which is the next level up. Not survival, but how do we become better? How do we leave the world a better place? How do we move forward as a human species with the idea of living longer, having a better sense of well-being for as long as possible, for as many people as possible? And that's not merely survival, that's thriving, right? That's a level above mere survival in the past.
And this is why I agree with that. But a lot of people are saying, yeah, but now you're going against the theory of evolution. Well, no, and yes and no. Because in a way you are, because you are no longer just fighting for survival. But in the other sense, yes, you are, because it's a product of that. So, it's not black and white. There's a lot of gray in between.
I mean, you could say it's a byproduct, right? That evolved to have this, but we're not stuck with it. We don't have to answer
exactly
evolutionarily in the strict sense of common descent or adapting to your environment. In a sense, we're adapting, but we're adapting in a very different way than we've ever done in history before as a species,
right, exactly.
Certainly as a human species. But if you're now going to try and tie that to evolution, I'm not going to accept that, and neither does many other people as well. Evolutionary biologists don't necessarily accept that.
People will die for these things.
Yeah,
they will sacrifice themselves for civilization to preserve these values. And it's,
yeah, that's just, all you're saying is that people think that their values are worth dying for. So there's many people throughout history that have done that, and some people have done it, be it Nazis or whoever, that we could say that their values are not good ones, but they've been prepared to die for it, right? That's a very trivial statement to say that people are prepared to die for it. Sure. But most societies have had people that are prepared to die for whatever that society is because they believe it's good or true or whatever the case is. So what?
I mean, we are human because we believe in those things that are beyond ourselves. So I think, in fact, we do live. We all live. Even if we deny, we all live as though there is such thing as a deity, even if we reject certain aspects.
How can anybody make that claim?
The water.
Why does he make that claim? What is it based on?
Well, because he wants everybody to be on the same playing field, and we're simply not. And his non-definition of deity there leaves a lot to be desired. There's certain things in my mind, because I've been doing it a while, so have you, that just like a red flag comes up for me. Obviously Pinecreek is being very charitable and just listening to this kind of thing, but there's so many things here, right? And the problem
I wonder whether he's going to react. Because now this was an assertion. This was just throwing out a claim, and I wonder if Pinecreek is now. I don't remember whether he's going to answer this.
Yeah, but I think too many things have been thrown out here, right? With this sort of thing, you've got to jump in, because otherwise the guy makes 10 assertions here, and it's difficult unless you're going to write them all down to remember all of them. And now you end up, being what we are as humans, you might remember the last one or two, but there are other ones that are important. They're like this idea of a deity. He's just muddied the water with what a deity is. My question is, what is a deity, and why should I accept your definition? Right? A deity is normally some sort of supernatural entity that people propitiate towards, right? Or think that are greater than them, that has power, that communicates with them, etc., etc. I don't believe that. So in my world, there isn't that. No, but you believe this is a deity. No, I don't. Now you're muddying the water with what you mean by a deity. I'm rejecting that. End of story.
And CJ,
so I would say to you,
CJ, yes, you are right, and Ike, you are wrong.
My evidence, or at least the point that I want to make, is that before we talk about Islam being the most coherent explanation, is that theism itself is the most coherent explanation, because nobody behaves like an atheist.
What?
What is that?
What? Okay, what's an atheist, and why do you say nobody believes it? What's the argument for that? Right? These are the questions out of the gate that you have to ask. This is just such in my view, a crazy assertion to make. Right? You've got so much work ahead of you to try and argue for this that is going to get me or anybody else to pay attention here. Otherwise, this is just throwaway comments. But the Muslim audience, I'm sure, loves this, right? Wow, Asadullah said this. Well, has he given an argument? Is there any reason we should think that this is true? Good luck. Especially if you're speaking to an atheist. I'm going to go, what? Like I just have?
But Rob, actually, if you look at the true sense of the word, he's right, because an atheist is just somebody who rejects the claims made by theists. That's it. So you don't. My thing is, I maintain that I am not an atheist. This is not something that I am. So I don't behave like one because it's only one single facet out of 50,000. So in the true sense of the word, he is right. But what he is intending to say, no, that is totally nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, you and I still have a bit of a disagreement on that.
Yeah, I know.
It does entail quite a bit about a worldview. And so I don't live my life as an atheist. Yes, I do, in the sense I don't believe a God exists. I don't believe there's objective moral values. I don't pray to any sort of entity. I've got to live the best life I can because that's what I want to do. I don't look out there for somebody else that's floating above my head to tell me what to do. I've got to do the hard work, have the conversations, think deeply about things myself. And so, yes, that's, for me, atheism does entail a lot of things that these guys don't have to do, which presumably is either too much hard work or because they find it easier not to do the thinking, but to do the following. I don't like to do the following unless I've already done the thinking and I agree with it. Then I don't mind following something because I've put thought into it, not because I've just follow it because, I haven't thought about it deeply.
Joining EF
I
Dawa,
understand
we are not allowed to join. They are too scared. That's why they said we're not allowed to go on there, because they can't handle this.
What's going on there now? I mean, we saw some stream, but that was for Christians or something. So, but we're doing our own live stream anyway.
What you're saying, I think a deity would be one explanation for that. Definitely. But I also think that if you look at the animal kingdom, you see chimpanzees, they will fight and kill each other, and they will also nurture and love each other. Now, maybe a deity gave them this type of, in quotes, morality as well, but maybe this is how they evolved to survive. Like when certain chimpanzees in the tribe get out of line, the other chimpanzees step in and create justice. So we see things like justice, fairness, empathy among other animals. And so if you accept evolution via common descent, I think you'll see that morality evolves. Like if you believe that we've been around for 200,000 years or more, Homo sapiens, there was a point where we couldn't even talk, really. And so when a male Homo sapien approached a female Homo sapien, there wasn't consent like we say today. There was basically coitus, forced coitus for reproduction. But we evolved to have vocal cords, and we can start asking, do you want to have coitus or not? And so in other words, the whole concept of rape is probably less than 200,000 years old.
Excellent
It's definitely less than 200,000 years old. So in this way, I think morality, and even look at the Old Testament with things like slavery and so forth, at one time it was acceptable, at least in a lot of cultures. Now we as a society frown upon it greatly. There's still some societies who have slaves, I'm sure, but some people say our jail system is slavery. But so I hear what you're saying, but I do think evolution could be an explanation of it as a transcendent, like above all humans, that we are all the way, because we have this common ancestry, that we're guided towards this this outcome for survival, for reproduction.
So my only
Yeah, I like the idea of bringing the other animals, right? The idea there is to show that it isn't just humans that seem to have some sense of morality, that have some sort of overarching goal that they want to achieve in some way, even if they can't articulate, write it down, or whatever the case is. There's something else going on there. So it's not just humans, and it's very likely that evolution has at least assisted us in getting there. And then once we get to a certain point, the cognitive faculties kick in, and we can soar with that, if you like. We can now take off and, where we've come in a society over the last 500 years compared to 200,000 years ago has been astonishing, right? I mean,
Right.
If we could plot a curve, I'm sure it would go off the charts. It would have been slowly getting better over time, but very, very flat. And then suddenly it's like it takes off over, a few hundred years because of our cognitive abilities and what we've been able to establish and talk and to rationalize and to empathize and so on, things that we never did in the past. So I think that part and tying it to animals, I think, is good for them as well, to see that, hey, it's not just humans that do this. At least these other animals do it, maybe not in the same sense we do, but they have some level of morality, or at least what appears to be morality that we can identify out there.
contention. I mean, I'm hearing what you say, and I let's just grant your explanation, just for the sake of argument. I think that I want to move forward with this. Let's assume that the evolutionary argument is correct in this respect. That said, my issue is that how does the natural world, and I'm using teleological language because I have no choice other than to do so, so don't take
You could use teleonomic, and I'm sure you might know what that is. You don't have to use teleological, because that's obviously begging the question against the naturalist position. So you could take a teleonomic approach, which is simply designed by nature, if you like, rather than designed by a mind. So teleonomic versus teleological, you could take that position. At least that way you could be on Pinecreek's level. Otherwise, you're already starting from a level that you disagree on.
Take it too literally here with respect to your argument, but how does it produce or decide to allow humans to believe in something beyond itself? What resources available within the natural world that allows, I mean, for example, it seems inconceivable to me that a natural process would allow us to come up with these abstractions when the animal kingdom, as you noted, does all of these things by themselves without having to write treatises about the nature of value and morality and belief and, why there is to worship and to create these very complex social constructs and things like this. It seems like they're doing it better from the evolutionary standpoint than we are. Like,
what's the argument for that? Better in what way?
I don't get it.
Yeah, he's trying to ask something like, how does nature or evolution give us the ability to come up with these complex sort of moral system? Well, I would say how that happens is through our grey matter. We have larger cranial capacity. We've got a unique brain system that no other animal seems to have. It's not the biggest in the world, but quite big in compared to the body, certainly bigger than any other primate. And that's the key thing that has allowed us to thrive and to excel over all other animals, certainly primates, but all other animals, on the planet. We're not the strongest, fastest, we don't live the longest. What we have got is a cranial capacity that has allowed us a unique set of skills and abilities that seemingly no other animal has. So that's the evolutionary thing for me that I can point to that makes us unique compared to other animals. Doesn't seem like it's a mystery to me, but maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see a mystery there. But just a quick one in the chat there. So somebody said, Rob, think about this. When you do your stuff in your daily life with do you do something like daily life with an atheistic approach? If you take a dump, you don't think, why should I consider because there is no God? No, I just live my life as if there is no God. So atheism is part of my life. It's not something that I think about all the time, but what I don't do is think that there's a God there. So essentially I live my life kind of in a sense unconsciously as an atheist. I go about doing life, doing the best I can, recognizing that praying to make me feel better is unlikely to have any meaningful result for me. So I'm going to go to the doctor, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z for the evidence of what I've seen to give my life, the best possible chance to have the highest level of well-being. So I'm doing it almost subconsciously. I'm not thinking about doing it, but if I stop and thought about it, I would easily show you or tell you that yes, it's because I don't think there's a God out there, and so I'm doing what I see the evidence best points towards for the goal that I want to achieve. So I'm actually living my life as an atheist, just I'm not doing it consciously every moment of the day.
Yeah, but now you're saying what I'm saying.
What's that?
Now you're saying exactly what I'm saying. This is exactly what I'm not consciously doing anything as in my capacity as a theist. I'm just running my life. And then if I think about it, I realize, I'm not asking for permission. I'm not looking for external confirmation of anything. I'm just running my life as good as I can. But I'm not conscious of doing anything in my capacity as a theist or non-theist or something. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah, but that's because you and I have kind of, it's almost like it's on autopilot. But if we stop and think about it, there's lots of inferences that are part of our lives. Yes. But because we've been atheists for some while, it's just kind of on autopilot. It does those, but the worldview still has implications that we just run on autopilot. The moment we stop and pause, we go, here's all these implications that are a fact of the matter. It's just that we don't think about it on a moment-to-moment basis.
This is so nice. Well, I used to like EFDAWA's videos, but then I found you guys, and now watching it is embarrassing. Thank you so much. That's sweet of you.
Nice one.
And we're also wasting a lot of... it doesn't appear as though there's any source for all of these ideas. That's what I'm trying to get across.
Yeah, that's
there
the disagreement
is,
between
you fool.
You and me. I think both explanations can work.
It's a shame that, okay, so he's saying, well, I disagree, then he's going to give explanations. I think, and this is something we harp on a lot, isn't it? You say to him, okay, why do you think that? Right? You made a statement that you think there's no source, quote unquote, and I think the source is our brain through an evolutionary process.
Exactly.
That for me is our source. You think there's another source, but why do you not think that this is a source? We've got to press them on when they make an assertion. Why do you believe that? What's the argument for that, right? Because the thing that Pinecreek is doing now is what most of us do most of the time, which is, no, I don't agree with that, and I'm going to give you my view. But their view then stands unopposed in the sense that, okay, you can give your view, but they're going to question your view. And all the while, their assertion remains untouched. And that's something that we should not allow. We need to critique their assertions, because it's very rare that they can give an argument for their assertion, and we can then investigate that. And that's one of the things that I think we should do more of.
But then the real issue becomes, what evidence do we have for one over another? And that's where we can get into specific theism, I guess. But the silverback gorilla is basically a god to the tribe of gorillas. They will do and follow whatever the silverback says. And I think in one way, we as humans...
Order a king.
Oh my God.
Yeah, well, it could be king, yeah. But I think we humans evolved more rationally to make, please don't take offense of this, but to make the silverback invisible, because there's less problems that way. And so I would expect that if naturalism is true, you would still have this concept of a king, but it would look very different depending on the geography and the culture, and that's exactly what we see.
Oof, that's a mic drop.
It's interesting.
Yeah, so I guess what he means by, I don't know if it's a king as in like you follow a particular human, but I think it's certain ideas which obviously come from humans. I mean, where else are ideas going to come from? They're not just going to poof into existence, so they come from minds.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think we will follow certain ideas, but again, some of us will follow ideas, especially if we've given it some thought. Some of them we might follow unconsciously, but if we stop to think about it, we might change our minds, or we might find good reasons to do so. So I'm not sure that I follow a particular person as in like a king in that sense, but maybe there's ideas that I think are king. That's maybe how I would define quote unquote king for me. But I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the idea of king, because it has a very normal connotation, which is some sort of ruler or divine, not divine, but supervising authority, as in like it's a concrete human of some kind. And maybe that's, as I say, not what he's referring to, but I don't like the idea of following a king in that sense. So I've got to now redefine it. What do I mean by that?
Analysis with respect to, because I was going to say it seems like a false analogy, because the gorilla is actually a physical object they can see, something they can visualize, something they can attach themselves to, that they understand because it's reflection of themselves, right? But when we talk about transcendence, I have a hard time figuring out the rationality behind making, say, an invisible silverback, in order to resolve some sort of issues, because those speaking on behalf of the silverback are still going to be visible to the rest of everyone else.
Isn't it interesting? That's exactly in a sense what you are doing. You have an invisible silverback, and somebody's speaking on behalf. Who is that? Your prophet, right? Interesting. That's exactly what you are doing, just in your own version of it. But you don't see that it's analogous. Interesting.
Also, they're going to want to kill them, right? So, as you know, there have been many religious conflicts throughout history as a result of people speaking on behalf of God. So I don't know how that sort of resolves. It seems to me to be an extra step that is completely and absolutely unnecessary.
Well, it's better in the sense that it's unfalsifiable for we humans. Like it makes it more malleable, and it helps with our survival. Like my sister, for example, she lived about 10 years longer or 5 years longer than she needed to because she was a Christian. She believed she's had MS. She died of MS. She was completely paralyzed, but she truly believed that she had to stay alive so Jesus could heal her. And so there's a perfect example of how a false religious belief can keep people alive. Like she had a feeding tube, but she had the choice to die or not. She had a feeding tube put in. She lived in excruciating pain for an extra 5 years, just so Jesus could heal her. And it never.
Well, to me, that's an example of like an immoral view, right? To stay in pain and suffering with the idea that you're going to be saved by Jesus. I think that's something that stops an eye, at least. And I have in my world that if I were in that state, I want to be put out of my misery, because it's misery, and the idea of having this mythical belief. So she was essentially, in torture or pain for 5 years, and that presumably that Jesus never came. And so to me, that's like, when I look at an example like that, that's to me religion in a very bad light. Somebody who goes through that pain with no guarantee that it's going to get them out of it, and in fact at the end of the life finds out that it didn't work, and so all that suffering was for nothing, which they don't know at the time, admittedly, but I think that's kind of a cruel byproduct of religion, at least for me. And she could have had the choice. He said she had the choice, but she chose to go through the pain and suffering, because to me this is one of the things that religion does. It gets people to believe that pain is unnecessary pain and suffering, although they don't want to acknowledge that it's unnecessary, but this pain and suffering is somehow a good thing. We're not talking about some sort of, where you could argue that it's a logical or a somewhat necessary pain and suffering, like getting having an operation, which is a bit of pain and suffering to allow you to live longer in good health. But the pain and suffering she went through there is just kind of one of those things that I think is a bad evolution, byproduct of religion. One of the things that I would point to go, hey, religion makes life or the world a worse place. That would be an example I'll try to remember for me as a reason why.
Never happened, of course. So it's very tragic. But
do you want to come in? Should be muted.
I mean, let me say that yes, I would agree that a false belief can lead to certain benefits. That's always possible.
Okay, but is that a benefit though? Living 5 years,
it's the other way around. Yeah.
Torturous, is that a benefit? You see, this is what these guys believe, right? They believe that the more torture and pain, or the more tests you go through, I think was it Hamza said so, the closer you are to God loving you. But then you should wish for more pain and suffering through your entire life. And if you are comfortable as a Muslim, that should be unpleasant for you. You should be going, hang on a moment. God only loves those who go through more of a test, and the test somehow involves discomfort, whatever that is. The more the discomfort, the greater the test, and the more God loves you, or that's at least what he claims. To me, that's just an awful view. But if they were consistent, that's what they would wish for. So I don't think that is a good thing that she...
And not try and apply Pascal's wager to this one.
Yeah, the opposite way around, yeah.
Possible, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, it doesn't appear to me to be the case that these things are just arbitrarily constructed for the sake of survivability. It does seem that there's a natural tendency, and I think you admitted this as well, because you're claiming that.
Okay, but you're saying it's a natural tendency. So you've given an answer there.
Case
if you
closed,
think it's not arbitrary, but there's a natural tendency, you've kind of answered your own question. So it doesn't require a God; it just requires a natural tendency.
We evolved to understand these things. So what I'm saying is that it's not a voluntary construct. This is something that seems to be naturally hardwired into human beings. And what I'm trying to figure out is, even if you bring evolution into the picture, how does that somehow undermine, a theistic explanation? It seems like you could actually, they're not mutual.
Well, quite easily, because it don't require a God then. But if this all happened naturally, then God is irrelevant to this thing. So you can't make an argument. You could still have a God existing, but what you can't do is say, hey, because you guys have this quote-unquote hardwired view, God exists. No, in fact, the opposite by your lights. If the evolutionary, unless you want to make the argument that God uses the mechanism of evolution, but that's not what you guys believe. So I don't think you can go down that route. So I don't think this certainly rules out, or certainly you can't use this particular line of arguing to argue for your God then, if that's what you believe.
It doesn't. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So, and also the issue here too is that if we're talking specifically about naturalism, right? It seems that naturalism limits the potentiality of evolution to such an extent that it would be impossible, at least from my understanding, that it could allow humans to construct such an idea. Because there's nothing within the natural realm that really gives us any...
Construct what idea? I don't know what idea. What ideas are you talking about? It's impossible to construct an idea. What idea, and why do you think it's impossible? 2 questions straight out of the bat. Which idea?
Sort of reference like this, there's nothing it's something that it's like, it seems like it's just completely out of thin air.
But here's my problem. My problem is that if evolution is true, and there's a lot of theists who don't think it's true, but if it is true, and at the same time, if Allah is real, I tell you, it blows my mind, because if Allah made the universe for us, or for maybe even aliens like us, but he made the universe for sentient beings, why billions of years? Why the laborious method of evolution be a common descent? Why the 90% of species going extinct? Why so much gratuitous pain and suffering? Now, I think naturalism explains that feature better, because it...
Oh, this is beautiful, right? Now we get into something of interest, right? Those are really powerful questions for a theist to answer, to think about an answer. I'm not sure that these guys will. I can't remember here, but hopefully we'll hear some sort of response. And I think this was part of the thing that you really liked about this. But those are very powerful questions that he's asked there, and I agree that naturalism explains that better, unless you have to redefine God in some way. Because I think
my favorite comes later.
Okay, cool. I think it's very difficult though to argue for an all-merciful God in the case of Muslims, or loving God in the case of Christians, with all of this in mind, with this massive universe that took billions of years using this method where there's a tremendous amount of pain and suffering. A lot of it seems to be completely unnecessary, and we can easily think of examples where the same goal can be accomplished without this pain. And so I think that, I think he claims to have a master's, or he has some degree in philosophy. Or
We've talked about this.
But I think there's somebody that investigated it, and the place that he got it, as I understand it, I stand to be corrected, is not something that is particularly well known or particularly accepted. I don't remember the details, but Detective Inspector Monkfish is the man to ask, and because he investigated this, he'll be able to tell you all the details. I don't remember the specifics though, but whatever degree he got, I don't think it was from a highly well-respected university or whatever, but I could be wrong on that, so I'm happy to be corrected.
Oh, it wasn't on the back of a cornflakes packet?
Not as far as I know, but I don't think it was from a proper philosophical university. But again, we'd have to defer Detective Inspector Monkfish.
But it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter what the qualifications are. Listen to what he is saying, and this tells you enough about whether this was a reputable institution or not. He doesn't understand it. This is the point.
It is senseless. There is no reason for it. It is horrible. I think naturalism can explain that better than the concept of an all-loving God who said, you know what, I'm going to make people to worship me, but I'm going to do it this way. And it's sure going to look weird to them, but I'm okay with that. You see where I'm coming from?
I do. Yeah, it's a shame. He made a statement, and he is kind of, they're going to respond to it, which is good. But it's like, I would certainly ask there, how do you guys explain this? Right? Or you could ask the question, because that's a bit of a leading question. What you could say is, do you agree that there's unnecessary suffering? They have to say no. The moment they say yes to that, well, then now you haven't got an all-merciful God. So they have to say no to it. A little bit of a leading question, but actually I think it's okay in that sense, because they have to kind of then respond to this in some way, and they have to deny that there is unnecessary suffering. Let's see if they actually do that.
I think this is actually the first of a three-step process. I'm not sure. Let's just continue, because I have this vague recollection. Just carry on. Let's see if I'm right.
Well, I do say, but at the same time, the naturalism making it senseless also sort of contradicts the idea that it's horrible.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Why is it that I look at something and I say it's horrible? And I do think we evolved because that helps with our survival. It's like you see someone put their hand on the stove and then their skin's melted away. I look at that and I can pattern seek and see, I don't want to do that. I see them scream in pain. I can empathize and say, I don't want that.
And I agree with that sentiment that there's a pattern-seeking behavior within human beings. But I'm trying to argue as well as that pattern-seeking behavior that you consider valid is also what allows us to believe in God and validates that belief. So for me, it's a natural.
Yeah, but I think, okay, but that's fine even if you had to say that or try to argue for that. But you could say that about anything. I think what Pinecreek is doing is a far more concrete example that we can all kind of be empathetic towards. We aren't empathetic towards something that hasn't been demonstrated to exist and doesn't seem to have any concrete value other than subjective value that you assign. Somebody puts their hand on the stove, unless they're a rare human being, and there are a few in the world, but very, very few, whose pain receptive, where it's cut off from the nervous system, where they don't feel pain. I read an article when I was much younger about twin boys who grew up and they had no sense of pain. But actually, it was somewhat difficult for them, because if they broke a bone or hurt themselves, they had no realization that happened. And so they would then run on to and would take longer to heal because they just had no sense of pain. In some sense, you go, oh, that's great. But in other senses, it's not. But for almost everybody, the thought of putting your hand on a hot stove and for the skin to be melted away is kind of a visceral experience. Even though we haven't felt it ourselves, we can empathize with it immediately and go, no, that would be pain. The amount of tremendous heat going on your hand would be something that we'd all shy away from, almost every human on the planet. And so there's a visceral example of that. And how or why? Because of our evolutionary upbringing and so forth. The pain receptors, how we can empathize with our brain, etc. Now you ask about God. No, it's not. You and I and many people look at this and go, no, there's no reason for us to do that. Nothing about that is universal in the sense that we go, oh yeah, there's some A, that we believe it's true, or B, that there's some sort of value in it in that same sense as the example that he gave. So I just, they don't map together, let's put it that way. It's a different category, I would always say.
natural. It's like a default position, and I understand. I'm not trying to borrow from the atheist here. I know the presumption of atheism, lack of belief, is considered to be the default. However, I would take a very different view.
Are you a philosophy major or a degree?
I have a master's in philosophy.
I can tell. Yeah. But maybe we're boring other people by talking about too much.
No.
I think the other people aren't sort of, they're probably not really following this too much. I would hesitate to guess. The silence there probably says more than we think.
Some inspiration from Michael Huemer. I don't know if you've heard of. He's a epistemologist. So
okay. Well, speaking of epistemology,
Shabir, you said at this point, Shabir, you definitely got something to say. I can hear it.
Oh yeah, I mean, it would have been good for them to continue on. Now we're going to get sort of a bit of a Shabir shuffle, I think, which Pinecreek might not be aware of, but he's going to certainly find out about it sooner or later. I think Shabir doesn't really have anything substantive to say, so it would have been good for them to continue that discussion. I thought that was a little bit more interesting, potentially.
I think you're in for a surprise.
Okay, I will stand corrected.
Oh, I was busy really going at it and listening to what the brother was saying. Doug, can I please don't mind. I'm just going to try and take you right back at the beginning. I was listening intently to what you were saying. I mean, for everything that you have said, what criteria have you actually used?
For what?
Okay.
For basing your understanding of life the way you do.
I would say in one word, induction, which the other gentleman I just talked to will understand what I mean by that. So when I look at the world around me, if I'm trying to make sense of it, it's similar to me looking at a bush and seeing a black duck come around the corner, another black duck, and another black duck. And so now the question is, what color is the next duck going to be? I'm going to say black until I have evidence that, it could be a white duck. And so when I'm trying to make sense of the world around me, it seems like in history, so many times we've had unanswered questions and they've been answered naturally, like lightning and so forth. And so this whole idea, like, where does morality come from? What's the cause of our universe exactly? Is it eternal?
Look, right? Everybody's finding this discussion more interesting. And of course, unfortunately, the host not sort of following along, either not realizing this or wanting to bring in the other guests when that discussion was a bit more interesting anyway. So yeah, interesting that even his sort of people were saying that the previous discussion was interesting.
Eternal, past or not, all these huge questions. I use it in induction to say, you know what, there could be a God to explain all this, but for now, I'm going to use induction to say it's probably a naturalistic explanation.
Okay, if we were to go with the naturalistic explanation, do you think that everything seems to have pointed towards a purposive view?
It's like a script, isn't it? I think that was a really good answer with the, how do you work this out? What's your basis or whatever, saying induction, right? So he's obviously thought about this, and that's kind of a good answer. And this is kind of very much a leading question. Does it look as if it's all been designed? Well, let's see what he says.
For humans,
yes.
I think in a way, yes. I think humans have a proclivity towards hope, meaning, and purpose. But if you look at the world in general, the universe in general, I'd say no.
Yeah. Why?
I would say because 96% of our universe is dark energy, dark matter, basically nothing. And there's such a small percentage of our universe, visible universe, that can hold life. It seems like that's a lot of wasted space.
That is on the assumption that we definitively know what dark matter and dark energy is.
Yes.
No, it's not even on that assumption. It's just the assumption that there's something out there that is hostile to human life. If you're not on Earth, almost anywhere else, as far as we can tell, anywhere else in the universe, you'll die instantaneously or near instantaneously, very painfully. Thank goodness it would be a very short-lived life. If you were out in space or anywhere on virtually any other planet that we've discovered anywhere, you would die very quickly, mercifully quickly. So no, it's not even on the assumption of dark matter and so forth. It's just on the assumption, which I think is a good one that we've discovered through, the satellites and so forth going out there, that everywhere else or almost everywhere else is hostile to human life. So in that sense, he's entirely correct. It's 96, it's higher, 99, recurring 9% is hostile to human life. Even on this planet that we supposedly has been made just for us, 70% of it we can't exist on for very long. If we were on water alone, we'd die within a short space of time. We can't catch fish, you can't drink seawater, etc. So no, this Earth isn't perfectly designed for us. We could imagine a far better designed universe with us in mind. So this universe seems to not care about us in the slightest, as far as we can tell, or I can tell.
Yes, yeah. But I think we all agree here. I think we all agree here, though, that we being on planet Earth is rare. Sentient beings, it seems like if there was many of us on different planets, we would have contacted each other by now. Maybe there are other people, but they're so far away.
Or maybe they hate us.
Or yeah, that's true.
I'm sorry, Doug. Hamza, just give me about 5-10 minutes. I'll get back to you.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I think that's good, right? There wasn't much you could say on that one. I think somebody said he handled Shabir well, and I think that was kind of hopefully Shabir throwing in the towel there.
No, it's external circumstances. Watch this now.
Oh, is it? Okay. Oh, what a shame.
But I was going to ask some questions about Islam specifically, because right now we're talking more about a philosophical God, which...
Yeah, thank goodness we're getting back to Islam. That was what he came on for originally, and we've gone through probably, I don't know, more than half an hour here of him answering other questions, which was not what he came on to do.
It's not very practical, not very pragmatic.
Yeah.
So I'm very familiar with Christianity.
Okay, obviously didn't realize that he hadn't switched off and so forth. Anyway, got rid of that distraction.
But do you, as Muslims, believe a lot of the Old Testament stories or no? No?
We're not held.
Yeah, we don't generally believe them. Guys,
Okay, Rob, just pause here for a second. Because remember what I said, the first question, the first part was the suffering. Now watch the second part, the setup.
Cool.
I did, but it's gone now.
Okay, that's my fun, and it's like really hot. It's more hot in Canada than it's in the Caribbean. I want to just answer a quick question that Pinecreek asked at the start because I was listening, and I'm sorry to hear about your sister and her multiple sclerosis. Basically, I was going to give the exact same answer that Asadullah did, but in just fewer words, which is I think that the God of Islam, God as it's represented in Islam, seems to be more coherent with reality than any other faith that exists. That would have been my answer. I didn't get the opportunity to give it, but please continue, gentlemen.
Yeah, but you guys have talked to Christians enough to know that they would say the same thing, that Christianity seems more coherent to them than Islam. And then guys like you and me will show the problems in their worldview, and then it's a back and forth.
Not necessarily the worldview, but their concept of God having more than one will is just basically equivalent to polytheism than anything else. And a God that competes against his own will is not a God by definition. So, it doesn't have to be about soteriology.
Well, I view Christians as polytheists, to be honest.
Amen, brother. I consider them henotheists, so just a form of polytheism.
Yeah. But like the flood story, do you believe that happened in history?
Yes, well, I want to say yes. I don't know what the others believe. I'm lying. Of course, I know what they believe. But there's a debate in Islam as to whether it is universal or local. I tend to take the localized view, but people may differ with that.
I take the localized view as well.
Likewise.
I think
I believe in a universal flood where everyone was killed. It's because one of the things that Allah says in the Quran is that He does not punish the people until He sends them a messenger. So arbitrarily killing people who are not directly involved with the specific messenger mentioned seems to go against that principle. So I think the idea is that if this flood would have been a localized one, as opposed to a global catastrophe affecting all human beings.
But whether it was localized or global, does that story bother you guys? Like Allah drowning people?
Our view of this is that, at least in the prophetic tradition, anyone who dies by an act of God, generally speaking, like an earthquake or hurricane, whatever the case may be, and they are an innocent soul, then they get heaven or Jannah, as we would say. So there is a minuscule amount of suffering for an eternity of.
So if they were an innocent soul, they go to heaven. Okay. Like you say, this is kind of the setup, right? I think let's not comment too much now because he's going to do a good job himself. So, but let's just highlight, he says that even, this is Ijaz saying that even if it's quite an innocent soul, they go to heaven, right? That's kind of, as I understand it, his response here. So even though they were drowned or, God took a life in whatever way, then, and they were, how you know they're innocent, who knows? Only God knows, presumably, but then they're going to heaven, right? Okay, good. So we've established something here. Let's see how it proceeds.
Pleasure. I think that's a good trade-off, but I don't know if Asadullah will have a different point of view here. Of course, I have to point to Asadullah because Mukit has been messaging me. Get Asadullah to speak. So, okay, fine, Mukit, I'm doing it. Now what?
Everyone can speak. It's fine.
This is why I did that one at the beginning.
This is a thought experiment I've asked Christians many times. I say, you're up in heaven, so I'll make this version in Islam. You're up in paradise with Allah and before the flood, just before the flood, and Allah looks at you and says, I'm planning to execute my justice on earth, and I'm going to give you two choices. I'm giving you the choices, Allah is speaking. So this is moral by definition because I'm giving you the choices. Choice number one, I'm going to drown everyone, either in this area or in the globe. Choice number two, I'll just poof them out of existence. They're gone. They won't feel nothing. They won't even see it coming. So all the toddlers, all the babies, all the pregnant women, just poof. Or I can drown. What would you say to Allah? Which way should he execute his justice?
I think you're
What a beautiful question, right? What
Hey.
a lovely question to ask. This is just amazing, because now they have to think they're standing there next to Allah. He's giving them the choice. This isn't a case that they can point to and go, hey, I'm following him. He's giving the choice. Whatever they choose is, according to Allah moral, what will they choose?
Is that a
they
beaut
have
or
to
what?
Think. Sorry?
Is that a beaut or what?
That's a lovely one, because now they have to think for themselves, right? He set it up in such a lovely way there that they can't just appeal to Allah, which they're so used to doing. Now they have to think, what would I do? And I don't know if he does it, I can't remember, but I would love to know the reasoning behind it. If they select one of these two, if they were honest and said, I would do this, why would you do this? Get the thinking out loud, get them to say out of their mouth their justification for choosing one over the other, so that they, their brothers, and the entire audience can hear them justify whatever choice they're going to make. Right? This is really good. Let's see what happens here.
Is human, and that's proof of existence. They stop existing altogether. There's no
No.
That's proof of existence.
Sorry, I'm just going to go back there.
What would you say to Allah? Which way should he execute his justice?
I think you're human, and that's proof of existence. They stop existing altogether. There's no reality.
Proof into heaven.
I would leave Asadullah to answer that, because Mukit is still messaging me.
Interesting how he dodges it, right? Very interesting question. Let's see how many people will answer there, right? That's a question that gets them to think, right? And I would, if I was Pinecreek, go, hey guys, I'd love each of you to answer this. I won't say anything more. Can each of you answer this, and then maybe tell us why you made that decision, right? Lovely, lovely question, right? It now gets them to think for themselves.
And look, Hamza is shutting up.
Mukit, stop! I can see it.
First off, I think that the perspective, I think I want to answer this in two ways. First off, I think that for Allah, when we start comparing Allah's sentiments versus humans, that's what we've already committed an error in many respects. And this may seem crude, but for Allah, it's like humans are like ants. It's like for us,
There we go.
It's not like
Humans are like ants, but doesn't he
go.
love his creation,
Exactly.
or at least some of the creation? Do you love ants? Well, we don't really love ants. They're kind of nondescript. If we happen to step on a few of them, it's not the end of the world. So, I mean, already I think that's problematic. That he thinks that Allah views us humans like ants. Then he's probably not going to be too concerned about it one way or the other. But again, that's not obviously the answer to this. Maybe he's going to say something more. But that's like a very odd question, and it kind of goes against Hamza's view, which is
Answer.
God loves those that suffer the most. But ants, you're ambivalent towards ants. Really, you don't sort of love them. You don't hate them. They are. That's a really odd description. That.
like his perspective of what happened, how we feel, or what we do is not the same as how we perceive it. So the pain that we suffer, he can rectify at any point in time. I mean, for example, even when you say like proof in the Jannah or the heaven, for God, the suffering that we go through in drowning or something is insignificant to the rewards that we will receive as a result of our suffering. So there's also in Islamic reality.
Okay, that is sick.
That is a monumental concession. I think he just said this in the moment and probably didn't realize the consequences or the inference there. So whatever you suffer for here is quote unquote inconsequential next to whatever else is going to happen. Well, firstly, you don't know what is going to happen after this. But if you believe that the more suffering you have, then, balance of probability, you might get more reward in heaven. But the question is that suffering necessary? And that's the big question that is being asked here, and especially with the proofing out of existence. If it were the case that you were going to get rid of people, would you allow them to drown, essentially, which is Pinecreek's question? Or now, because now you, Asadullah, or the rest of you guys, you are being given the choice. But notice how they are so used to appealing to Allah, because they don't need to or want to think for themselves. I mean, if I was a Muslim, I go, I want to proof them out of existence. But then, of course, I'm left in the uncomfortable position of going, well, okay, it didn't go that way. And now I have to go, ooh, okay, well, Allah knows best. And if I went the other way and said, well, hey, I'd want them to drown, then people would look at me and go, why would you want that to be the case? If you had the choice and they end up at heaven ultimately anyway, why would you do that? What sort of psychopath are you? But the fact that he thinks that it's only a small amount of suffering, he's just conceding that there's unnecessary suffering there, because if he was proofed out of existence and you go to the same place, then what's the point of the suffering? That doesn't
is
seem to me to
exactly-
be all merciful.
That's so sick. It's so sick in my eyes.
I just don't think he realized the implications of what he was saying there.
Yeah, but it
His
makes,
mind of-
it makes Allah a psychopath.
Yeah, but I think it's maybe, maybe he's
sadist.
thinking it's a bit like an operation or whatever the case is. So he just didn't realize in the moment the implication of what he's saying. And again, he's speculating this is the case, but he's just,
Theology, we have this idea that people suffering will not be as great as the reward that they receive in heaven, to the extent where they won't even forget what happened. Like, it's that great.
Okay, but they're not going to, they're going to remember it and they're going to feel it during the time. And Pinecreek's view is, well, hey, if you had the choice, remember the question, if you had the choice and they ended up in heaven anyway, why would you not poof them out of existence? So you're saying that, is it better? Because if you choose the option where they're going to drown, which will take however long, let's say it takes 5 minutes, excruciating pain, or maybe longer, right? Some people can survive longer.
The terror,
Excruciating
yeah.
pain, or maybe hours, right? You're treading water, whatever the case is, and then you go under, you try and come up again, etc., whatever the case may be. Why would you want to go? Why would you want to go through that? Oh, well, they're going to forget about it afterwards. Well, okay, but then why not go through the suffering here yourself in this world and see what it's like, right? If you're the sort of person that think that that's okay, why don't you drop yourself out at sea? It's going to be a short thing anyway. Maybe you do it for some other reason. You want to swim across the Atlantic or the English Channel, and then you recognize what it's like to suffer and stuff like that, and see, well, okay, it's only going to be for a short while. The time that they're suffering for is still the time they're suffering for. And the fact that they might forget it in heaven is irrelevant to the time that they are experiencing the suffering.
Of a rectification that everything that they went through is nothing.
But why do you think?
But it's not nothing, because they're going through it. And poof would be nothing. So the opposite of poof is something. So it's not the case that it's nothing. He is trying to minimize it here, right, to make it sound like. And obviously, believers will go, hey, there's greater reward in heaven. So whatever the suffering is, yes, that's what they're told or have come to believe. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. If the pleasure was minimal up in heaven and the suffering was maximal down here, then they wouldn't want to go through it. So they are precisely told that whatever suffering here is minimal, so that whatever you go through here, you just got to grin and bear it. Like, Pinecreek's, I guess it was sister, that went through 5 years of suffering. And so they're told that that's the answer to it, to try and make it sound like it's okay to go through it here, because you'll get this, which you can't guarantee anyway, this endless, wonderful life afterwards.
Small investment.
Yeah, that's the idea, right? But is it actually an investment? Or is it, in fact, like a theft or a scam?
Have why toddlers, babies suffer at all? Like, to drown they're going to tread water for a minute, maybe at least 30 seconds. The water will fill the lungs. It'll be a bad, horrible death. Why do that if Allah can just poof them out of existence and they go straight to heaven?
There you go, right? But you see, he's made it with Allah. What I would have been even better if Pinecreek ever watches this, said, but you had the choice. Why would you do that? Would you do that? And why would you? Because now we've gone back to Allah, right? So now they can offload it on Allah. But the original question I thought was absolutely brilliant, where they were given the choice. I think if you kept it on them answering the choice, okay, so you said that, what would you choose? Would you choose that, given what he's just said there now? Virtually anybody who's watching this, and probably even them, would cringe at the idea if they had the choice to watch a baby drown or poof it out of existence. If you had this choice as any human on this planet, would you allow the baby to drown there in front of you or poof it out of existence?
But the way he phrased the question is a little bit different. It says, Allah turns to you and asks you, what should I do? So you have to advise Allah what your opinion, what your approach would be. So you are going to suggest to Allah what to do. And the point, what they are not getting at all, is that they are not in a position to give any kind of advice. It goes the other way around immediately. They are not even able to they can't wrap their head around the question. They cannot in any way process the question. They have to go immediately, it's Allah down. It's not me telling Allah what to do. It's always Allah telling me what is best. And that is what is so brilliant about this question. Exactly what you said. It is me being asked, what would you tell Allah what to do? Boof. And that is what I love about this.
Yeah. But like I say, what he did now is say, okay, now he's put it.
Yeah, he gave up a bit. Yeah,
I would have liked
it's
him
true
to continue with this, but say, okay, so what would you do, or why would you do that? right? That example of the baby there, I think, is visceral, right? That's a great example. That's like putting your hand on the stove. Virtually every human who can imagine a child, unless you're a psychopath, and there's, obviously there's a few of those out there, but the majority of humans on the planet, the thought of a baby suffering and drowning in front of you is almost too much to bear. And if you had the choice, and you only had the choice of allowing that baby to drown in front of you or puffing it out of existence, any empathetic human on the planet, almost, even these guys, or most of them, would poof it out of existence. Because the opposite would be just, as you say, monstrous.
I'm 100% sure that behind the scenes there is some hectic activity going on at the moment, where a lot of these guys are sitting together. Oh, fuck, what are we going to do if somebody else is going to ask us the same question? So I'm sure they're now in the process of coming up with a script that they have an answer to. And I'm predicting that it's going to be very, very tough for them to find some sort of cogent response to this kind of a challenge. I doubt it, but I'm sure that there's some hectic activity going on because they realize they have just been totally flattened, all 5 of them. 4 of them.
Yeah, I think maybe you're giving them too much. I think you're giving them too much credit there. I don't know that that's happened, but we'll see. Maybe you're right, and I'll come back and say, you know what, you were right. But I don't think that they've, even after.
You don't think they've realized?
Contemplated the implications. No, I don't. I just don't think so. No, but I could be wrong. It'd be nice if I'm wrong, actually. That would be a case where I am wrong, where they contemplated this sort of thing. But I think if this question were asked again, I'm not sure that they're going to have anything more substantive to say.
Well, why is it relevant?
Well, it gets to the concept of how you view Allah. Like, what is Allah like? Is Allah the type of God who would poof or drown?
If I'm an all-powerful God who can grant you reward for eternity, I think 5 minutes of pain isn't a big deal.
Whoa, there we go. There we go. Right? That should tell you something about the mindset of this Asadullah Ali, right? The fact that he would essentially allow 5 minutes of pain, according to him, a ghastly death for a baby, because that was the example given, or he had the choice of poofing him. He is going to rationalize, quote unquote, 5 minutes of pain. That's the reductionist view you can take, that a theist will take when they put under pressure a little bit. This is not even massive pressure. It's just slightly something they may not have thought about in that way. But what a response, right? It's just 5 minutes. Reduce that pain down to us, just 5 minutes. It's not your 5 minutes. If it were your child, goodness forbid, right? I wouldn't wish that on you or anybody else for that matter. But if it was your child or somebody that you knew, and that child was there drowning for 5 minutes, and you had the power, and you knew that the child was going to heaven, and you had the power to poof it out of existence, would you really let it go for 5 minutes? Would you? I don't think you would. I think that this is, you've in your head, you've reduced this, but in doing so, you have revealed quite a bit about your thought process.
Even experientially, actually. I mean,
just look at he's like completely quiet there, right? Pinecreek is just like, whoa.
Enjoying the awkward silence.
Broken arm?
I torn my knee ligaments.
Okay, so when was that? How long ago was that?
About 10 years.
Was it painful?
Oh, yes. We're still giving birth. I took off all the women in this.
How do you feel about it now?
I still feel a little bit of pain, but it's better.
Okay, you see the question, but again, his answer was brilliant, right? How do you feel about it now? Because what he was hoping is going to say, it's all fine now, I don't remember it. He said, I still feel it now, right? So actually the answer was sort of against what Imran was hoping were going to be said. It happened, but I'm better for it now, or something like that. You see, it's not so bad, right? That was kind of where he's going for. But actually the response is, I still feel it now. There's still this lingering, sort of after effect that is, would I want that? Looking back, no, I wouldn't want to, damage my ligaments in such a way. But what he's trying to do now is damage control, trying to get trying to get Pinecreek to agree with Asadullah's kind of startling, acceptance that it's just 5 minutes of pain. If I was an all-powerful, the 5 minutes of pain is not a problem. It is a problem if you claim that you're an all-merciful God. It's a massive problem, and you just don't realize the implications of what you've said there. And Imran is trying damage control, and actually it's not working here. It's certainly not at this stage.
And the thing is that Imran is supposed to be a medical doctor, and it shows you what a brutal, heartless bastard he really is.
Yeah, instead of recognizing that wouldn't have been a good thing, or saying something to try and mitigate Asadullah Ali's thing.
Minimizing suffering.
None of them say anything about it, right? Which either means they all agree or they're too scared to say something else.
Look at Hamza, he's very busy.
Yeah, which is just like if you had said that, Stops, I go, whoa, Stops, I don't agree with that, right? Okay, you have that view, I don't. I wouldn't sit quietly, because otherwise it sounds like I'm implicitly agreeing with you. And if you were to say something, and I know you wouldn't, but if you or I were to say that, I'm sure you or I would go, no, but that's not, I don't agree with that. I would poof them out of existence, whatever. But what does he do instead? Try to mitigate this as if this 5 minutes isn't really a problem, and somehow God can still be all merciful. It's stunning that he would have said this. Stunning, really.
So what about a million years' time?
Yeah, it would probably be nothing.
It'll be an insignificant memory. And this is the whole thing. So we're in this.
What's the whole thing? Notice how he says this, right? This throwaway comment. That's the whole thing. No, you're not realizing the implication. It's not. The whole thing is that your God is not merciful in this case, where you have the opportunity for mercy in every way. What any rational human being can understand by mercy, you're trying to say is not merciful, but you haven't got an argument in favor of that. In fact, everything that you say, and even Pinecreek's response, is evidence to the contrary, that it is not merciful. It's the exact opposite of what mercy would look like.
Our position is that this isn't life. This isn't it. In fact, we have an internal consciousness going forward.
And that's just rambling rhetoric. What the claim here is that your God is all merciful, and what Asadullah Ali suggested is that this all merciful God, it's all right if it's only 5 minutes of unnecessary suffering, because it's unnecessary precisely because you have the ability to poof them out of existence in the scenario that Pinecreek, or indeed in any scenario, you could poof them out of existence instantaneously, especially if they were innocent.
And so your any experience that you may have of suffering becomes, as that brother said, a faint memory that you don't even remember. We have a famous saying from the Prophet upon him, I think it's Hadith Qudsi, that somebody who suffered throughout their lives, torture, rape, murder, whatever that may be, who dies, when they are dipped in heaven for a moment, they will be asked about, did you ever experience any suffering? And they will say, no, we never even came across the concept. And the other,
well, they'd either be lying or they'd simply be mistaken. So that's not a benefit, right? They either are liars or their mind has been wiped, in which case they don't remember it, or they're just mistaken. So that point is irrelevant, and in fact goes against your view. It's not as if they haven't actually had suffering. Of course they've had suffering. Maybe they're in a better place now, and the suffering doesn't seem so much, but they had suffering. All you have to do is take them back to that time, right? Because God's all powerful. Take them back to that time, put them in that moment again, and now ask them, are you suffering? I bet you they aren't going to say, hey, this is a walk in the park. But this is the way they try to minimize this. Hey, afterwards it's all good. We don't care about the afterwards. That's what you guys claim. We care about the moment that something's happening, because that's what your God is on trial for, in want of a better word. This all-merciful God. Is he in fact operating all mercifully as any rational human being, including yourselves, should or would believe? And the answer seems to be no. And you are trying to, A, you're not realizing this, B, you're trying to minimize it somehow. And that says a lot about you guys. It really does.
I'm getting
the other way around. If you take somebody who's had all the trappings and the pleasures and everything in life that you can think about, who's never had a moment of discomfort, and they're dipped into the hellfire for a moment, will be asked about the same scenario. Did you ever experience any pleasure? And they will say no. Now the question, the idea here is that just even experientially, we understand. I mean, many people around the world have been circumcised as a child. Muslims, Jews, we do this. Some Christians in Africa still follow this, this practice. Now, obviously, one of the worst pains you can go through, some of the most densely packed sensory receptors that you're going to find are going to be in this area, would have been a very traumatic experience to go through. I have no recollection of that pain, and that's
okay. The fact that you don't have a recollection, stop. We should find that video again. That picture. I don't know if you could find the image here, and let me know if you can, of those babies. You remember there's that quite famous image that's floating around the internet with about 5 or 6 or 8 babies all lying there with blood on their genitals, crying and screaming, right? That picture that's etched in my mind of children that have been circumcised without any, pain. It happened to me. Obviously, I don't remember it. But if I were to go back there now, it would be, at that moment in time, almost unbearable. The pain would be searing. And I would want a loving parent to step in and say, no, don't do that. Unless it was in my best interest in some way you showed that I needed this in order to survive and thrive. If you couldn't do that, that to me would be unnecessary punishment. That would be torture. But if we could find that image, right, because what he's suggesting here is that, hey, afterwards, he's been circumcised, so have I, others have, it's not so bad. It's bad in the moment. That's the only thing that we're talking about. Not, yes, you can get over it afterwards. This idea that you can rationalize it because you can get over something is not the argument. The argument is at the time, it's tremendous suffering. And unless you have an argument that it's necessary, then it's by definition unnecessary, which means that it's not merciful.
And that's purely a experiential time-based thing. Now, if you were to take that, imagine this pen is your life, and this black point is actually the back of it is simply your life here, and the rest of this pen goes on for infinity into the distance. This at some point when you're looking at this whole thing, this is going to become either so insignificant that you don't see it, or it's going to be non-existent in your memory. Yeah. And so when we look at these things, so that suffering that child or that may have had for that few minutes or whatever that might be, is not it's an very emotive argument, but in the big scheme of things, it doesn't really hold much weight in terms of judging the character, trying to judge Allah by this action.
And I want to, if I may, I just want to say that I understand your perspective. Yeah. I understand where you're coming from. I do feel what you're telling me, but I want to sort of give you an alternative here. Let's bring back the flood without God, and that child, and that mother, and that father, all those innocent people suffer and die, and then there is no rectification.
I hear you.
So what I'm saying is, like, in any case, there is going to be pain, but one of them, at least, and like I said, I'm not trying to make this out to be like, oh, what's more convenient? But if we're going to play I'm not going to say the emotional card, but the sort of like, do you really want this? Right? Is this something that you would want? I would prefer there be a case at the end where I got to be like, okay, you went through this much suffering. Here's your eternity of paradise. Have a nice day.
Yeah. Well, the point, and I'll put.
Okay, but you could have the same thing and not have the suffering. Especially if it's innocent, if it's toddlers, children, whatever the case is, anybody that's innocent. Because remember, Ijab said that the innocent go to heaven. Well, do they need to suffer that? Is that merciful? And if you could put them out of existence, surely that's more merciful and they still go to heaven. So then the suffering this sort of suffering that happened is unnecessary, and therefore God is not all merciful.
I'll put all my cards on the table. The point of this question is to get to the nature of Allah. Does he desire pain in infants, even if it's just for 10 seconds and will be forgotten forever? Still, it's pain for 10 seconds. Does Allah desire that?
No, I find it irrelevant.
What's that?
I think he finds it irrelevant.
Okay.
So what's the argument for that? He finds it relevant to inflict pain, unnecessary pain, or if you think it's necessary, your argument that he finds it relevant for what? What's the argument that he finds it relevant to inflict pain on the innocent children, or babies for that matter, whatever, for them to drown? How is that, quote, relevant?
The other way to understand that's a great interesting thing. So this is when it comes back to this necessary being that you mentioned right at the beginning. We sort of stated that, but ultimately there's only so much that you're going to be able to infer about the creator. That's going to be your limits of sort of getting to. So we can maybe get to having a will, being powerful, knowledge, not being time, space, and matter. These things sort of you can come to this when you analyze a necessary being. A lot of things may have to come directly by communication from that creator themselves. You're not going to be able to. So if you want to know about the nature of the creator in this maybe specific aspect, then that would be best coming from that individual. Now, so there's a journey now to go along. First journey is to analyze Brother Asadullah made a great point that, and I'm just going to reiterate that actually the meaninglessness of the atheist position, anything that you care about, even this discussion, ultimately has no meaning, no value. There is no point in even having the discussion if you think that whatever time you have there is just an accident within the great cogs that are whirring that is the universe.
It matters while we're alive. It matters for the generations that come after us. It matters that we can leave a legacy to leave this world in a better place than it was before. Even if it doesn't mean anything to the universe, it means something to us. It means something to the future generations. That's what it does mean. And I'm just going to quickly share a picture here, because why not? Because of this whole idea of minimizing it. Since they want to bring this up, I'm going to do the same here very quickly and just share a picture here, if I can share screen here quickly on this particular picture.
Because I couldn't find it.
Well, I haven't got that particular one, but newborn dies in Italy.
Oh, yeah, there's lots of those, yeah.
I really wanted to make this picture the big one here, right? Here they are without an anesthetic. Look at the pain on this child's face and tell me that this is what an all-merciful God would do, or indeed what any of you would do. And these guys seem to think, well, hey, if I don't remember this is a short amount of pain. It's not a problem. Tell me that if this was your child, if you're looking into the eyes of that child and you are somebody that supposedly has empathy, and tell me while they scream in agony that, in fact, you'll get over this, that's not a problem.
Well, I mean, would these guys voluntarily do
God.
this? Would they now sit down or lie down and have me do that and say, okay, I'm going to cut off a piece of your penis, and then don't worry about it. It's just going to hurt you a little bit. I mean, in regarding and taking into consideration that there's eternity in front of you, you're going to have it like forgotten in no time. Is that what they're going to do? I bet you're not.
No, it's utterly demoralizing that human beings can end up believing this sort of stuff. Would you do this to your children? Yes, because hey, they'll get over it. Are you merciful? Are you loving? Unless you could demonstrate it's necessary. If you can't demonstrate it's necessary, like I said, then it's by definition unnecessary and therefore not merciful.
And I understand your perspective, but what I'm getting at is with the flood story is even a bigger picture, the problem of evil, which I'm sure you're all well aware of. And for me, it is really difficult to believe that an all-knowing and all-loving and all-powerful God exists that would create anything. Because Allah doesn't need people, right?
That's true.
He is self-sufficient. He is perfect. So there's nothing that can be added to him that would make him better. And so then I think if I ask this question, I think we're all going to agree that if Allah never created, there would be no evil, no sin, no suffering, no pain, no death, if he just chose not to create.
And also the opposites.
Yes. So, but here's the thing. The opposite is all that stuff I
just want to stop this for a moment. I'm going to quickly give you an argument. I'm going to just say it out loud. You can always look it up yourself. But this is a very interesting point. They were all nodding along, but they don't realize the implication. I'm going to give you a quick argument here. I'm going to 5 premises and a conclusion. I'll just read it out quickly. Premise 1, if God exists, then God is a morally perfect being, right? They all agree to that. Premise 2, the world is morally imperfect now. They all agree with that, right? We're all morally imperfect, and presumably even if you don't think about other animals as being moral agents, we're morally imperfect. Premise 3, if God is a morally perfect being, then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection in the world. Premise 4, if God is a morally perfect being, then prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect. They would agree with that. Premise 5, if prior to God creating anything, the world was morally perfect and the world is morally imperfect now, then the actions of a God has decreased the degree of moral perfection of the world. Conclusion, if God exists, then his actions cannot decrease the degree of moral perfection in the world. Therefore, actually, did I get the last bit in there? I think I've missed one out there. I think then conclusion 2 is then a morally perfect God does not exist. So that's an interesting sort of philosophical argument against a morally perfect being if you accept those premises. Now, of course, they would have to argue against those premises, but if they accepted it, then it would show that a morally perfect being does not exist. So interesting. I just thought, it just occurred to me now, and I knew I had that argument somewhere there, so I just wanted to bring that up.
Is that the one that James brought up? Because he brought up 2 of these.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
And they're very, very nice.
Yeah. Now, of course, they'll have rebuttals to that, but if you presented that to any of these guys here, would take them, I mean, maybe Yasser would be the only one who could attempt to try and argue. The other guys wouldn't really have a clue, I would imagine.
That I doubt.
Us good stuff, plus eternal life and so forth. But Allah doesn't need that. We do, maybe, but not him. So the real question I'm asking is, why would Allah create in the first place?
Exactly. Rob, just wait a moment, because what he's just done, he's stuck the knife in and now he's twisting it. And it's beautiful to watch.
Yeah, and the other thing that I thought was great, right, he ignored Imran's sidetrack there about, atheism, why and atheism, right? Ignored all of that and just went back to the question. I think that was really well done as well.
Excellent.
Not to have to say, just ignore it and go back to the question as if whatever, Imran said there is irrelevant, because all he's doing is trying to turn it around on the other person, right? That's one of their regular, well-worn tactics. when we can't answer something or it's difficult, okay, well, what about your worldview, right? I'm not interested in my worldview. So he just ignored that, which I think is great. Right, so why create is his big question here. If Allah's perfect, etc., a bit like the argument I presented there, then to create and decrease the level of perfection in the world would be problematic for an all-perfect being.
Give a slightly different perspective on this then, right? Allah chose to create us. He didn't have to create us, right? And I look at it as the difference between God pressing a button and us popping into existence, and Allah choosing to create each and every one of us individually. Right, Brother Shabir, I was wondering, like, why is, Dr. Imran telling me?
Yeah, okay, so he made a trivial statement. He didn't have to create us, but he chose to create us. Well, great. That's a trivially true statement, but that in no way, let me stress that, in no way does that even remotely start to answer the question that Pinecreek raised, which is why would God need to create? Not that he can't create us or that he chose to. Obviously he chose to, we didn't have to be, etc. Why are we here if he doesn't require anything, right? Sort of like an argument from creation type thing, similar to the philosophical argument I presented there.
Tell me to stop. I'm like, did I say something?
No, just thanks a lot.
Just to let you know, I have about 5 minutes left.
Okay, I'll just let the others continue then, because my point was tangential.
Well, yeah, your point wasn't even tangential. It was absolutely trivial. You didn't even respond to him in the slightest there. So again, one thing that I've been listening there, and I'm going, okay, thanks. That didn't really answer my question. Does anybody else want to address my question directly?
Yeah.
Because that didn't in any way address the question.
Yeah, but he's too polite for that.
Well, maybe it's his first time, and it leaves conversation open as well. But the thing is, if somebody like Ijaz sort of mentions a trivial point like that, then either they think the question has been answered or they want to move on. But really, you've got to hold them to it, because that in no way addressed the thing. So you've got to stick with it. You've got to be quite firm in sticking with it and say, okay, I don't think that answered the question. Does somebody else want to answer that for me?
Yeah. The funny thing is, apparently he was in the ring with 8 Christians and they treated him like shit, because I've seen a lot of comments where people say these 5 Muslims treated you 10 times better than the Christians did. So everybody was so cordial, so wonderful, and so sweet and everything. I mean, I think these guys are totally morally, totally corrupt. But at least they didn't shout at him, and they didn't, speak over him and things like that. So here they were on their best behavior. But apparently with the 8 Christians, it was a different story. So I'm
I can imagine
to watch that.
I've seen a few of those Christians. Yeah, if you can post a link there, Scopes, we can organize.
I haven't seen it. I haven't found it yet. I need to look for it.
If somebody can find it, that'll be great. Or let us know what the title is of that discussion. We'll have a look at that. But I think the other reason they were cordial is because he came in and he was so cordial. A, they didn't know him. B, he didn't challenge the Quran directly. He asked general, more broader questions, although it teased out some very sort of startling and interesting responses from some of them. But he wasn't an ardent critic. They didn't know him, and he's been very, very cordial himself. So I think that has all led to, and I think they'll even see at the end here, they say, oh, come back again, right? The only reason that these guys would say come back again is because they don't realize or feel like they were pressed very hard, and that the person was as a nice interlocutor because he didn't challenge them strongly, right? That's why they will say come back again. As soon as you challenge them strongly and you don't allow them to talk bollocks, then they get defensive. Then they don't really want to have you back, right? They don't want to have you back. They don't want to have James back. Maybe I'll come back again. I just haven't had a chance to. But anybody that's a strong critic in the sense of holding them to account, that they don't like. So that all ties into why I think they've been so nice, and he's been very cordial to them.
Case, I just want to say that prior to leaving, because I want everyone else to talk as well, I enjoyed the conversation. I truly believe that you're very intelligent, very rational, and very sincere, and I greatly appreciate your presence in this show. I hope to speak with you again in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely, and likewise, I echo that. And please do come again. We'd love to have further discussions with you. But I just wanted to make one point about something you said right in the beginning, and you compared the necessary being with the universe being a brute fact. And I think the only thing that I would say to think about, I mean, it's too much probably to unpack now, is that if we think there are contingent things in the universe itself is a set of contingent things, then that contingency is the property of the set. And therefore the universe requires an explanation, whereas a necessary being, but definitionally, is the explanation for everything else. And I think that's a discussion probably we need to go into a little bit more, just to iron out what we really mean. But can the universe be a brute fact? And there's ways of sort of trying to analyze and come to a conclusion on that. But Doug, really, it's been nice talking to you. And I wish you
I want to say that sometimes I'm treated, when I say I'm an atheist, especially around Christians, I'm treated like an enemy. And I want to thank you guys for not treating me like an enemy.
Doug, just before you go, I want to praise you for two things. One, sorry, I'm lying. Three things. I'm not good at not telling lies, apparently. The first is thank you again for the pleasant conversation. The second is thank you for your expose on David Wood and his treatment of, Muslims and different people. I do think that was a very good video that you did. And thirdly, your treatment of the Rabbi Zacharias issue, I think, was also quite admirable. So thank you for at least adding to the conversation in a polite, nice, pleasant, meaningful way.
Okay, so there we go. So again, I think for me, Stop's going to have the last word tonight. I think for me, I like the way his whole approach to it. It was calm, it was cordial. But some of those questions, although phrased very softly, etc., actually had very deep implications that these guys were unaware of. And that included Asadullah. And the response to me, the most eye-watering response here for me, is that they seem to agree and try to argue that a small amount of suffering isn't really a bad thing in the great scheme of things, not realizing the implications of that particular statement and how it sort of made them look and come across, especially if they had the ability, which is what he originally put to them. They were very cordial, I say, because he was cordial to them, etc. Maybe if they watch this, or if people sort of let them know that it didn't go well for them, they didn't even realize it, maybe they'd be a bit more guarded in future. But I think, Pinecreek did a pretty good job for his first time with them. Yes, there can always be things that any of us can do better. So we've learned something. If he ever watches it, maybe he will. Maybe we get to talk to him in some way. But overall, I think it was certainly educational. It was certainly very eye-opening for us as well.
Yeah. The nice thing is that he tore them a new one, and they didn't even realize it. And this is the fun thing for me to see this. It was amazing. And I put the link for the video. I found it, and I put the link in the chat. So if anybody wants to watch it, go ahead and do that. Now, for me, the eye-opener is that they actually agree that the nature of their God, who claims in chapter 1, sentence 1, to be the most merciful, the all-merciful, is not merciful at all, because he allows suffering of people because it is a relatively short time period. Well, it's traumatic for the human being who is being treated like that, but then why worry about it if you're going to go to paradise? Well, what happens to the people who go to hell? What happens to the people who don't have any of that? Why let them suffer and then punish them on top of that and send them to hell or something? That's crazy. I don't understand how anybody can say, yeah, I have the most merciful and the most rational logic, and what did Shabir say? Rational logic and, I don't know, reasonable God or something, and then go and say, well, yeah, well, he's not of any one of those things. So for me, this is a great way. It's a great way of setting it up. First saying, well, okay, do you agree that there are stories, and do you agree that there is suffering? Would you allow this? And this is a great approach to do this, and I'm definitely going to copy it and see what the reaction is going to be. So, yeah. Pinecreek, thank you for that.
Excellent. So hopefully you all have enjoyed that review. I've got a few days where I can probably do one next few nights, so maybe we'll do one either tomorrow or the next couple of nights. We'll see if Stops and I'm certainly available. We'll see how Stops is doing, and if there's any reviews you want to do, typically with atheists and Muslims, whether it's a live stream or some other discussion, then let us know. The other thing is you can always join us on Discord, or at least come onto Discord, and you can always message us there, or drop an email, drop a comment. If there's something, there's the Discord link. I'll post it in the chat there. You could always pop in and say hi, or message me or Stops directly if you've got any videos. Some people do message us, and then if we get the chance, we'll do some reviews of a video that you request. We'll look at the video first, make sure that it's worthwhile, depending on how long it is, how much is involved, and then we can potentially do a review. So on that note, right. Stops, thank you so much, as always. Give
us a thumbs up or thumbs down. Just give us a reaction.
Yep, give us some information. And thank you to everybody who viewed it. Thank you if you just watched this as a recording afterwards. And we'll be back, I'm sure, with another review in the very near future, if not tomorrow night. Thank you and good night.
Thanks, guys. Good night. See you.